Yeehaw! Welcome everyone to episode 145 of ThROH The Years, the podcast that reviews Ring of Honor show by show from the beginning. My name is Trevor Name, joined as always by the co-host of the show, Fat Moyerstein. Matt, I added a yeehaw and it threw me off. There are no take twos on this show. We roll with it.
We're just like Ring of Honor back then when they would just have terrible promos and awful mistakes. They were just like, we don't bother re-recording. Why would we? Who cares, right? Nobody holds us to any kind of standard. So why would we have to do it right? That's our motto.
Just like Ring of Honor, horribly offensive things left on the cutting room floor. Matt, we have a huge show this time, so we have a lot to get to. Of course, today we will be covering Good Times, Great Memories, where we'll be saying goodbye to a lot of wrestlers, because for those who are just new converts to ThROH The Years, when a significant wrestler in the company leaves during this run, we usually cover their match, their segment, and then talk a little bit about their careers. And there are a lot of people who qualify for that treatment this time, especially Colt Cabana, who his farewell to the company, this show was all built around. And so I thought we'd start off the show with, not summing up his career, because we'll save that for the end, but I wanted to read a couple quotes from Colt, because this is stuff I could have probably included on the WrestleMania weekend shows or the show after those where it was announced that he was leaving. But Colt actually, I found in his own words, talking about how he got to WWE. And I thought that'd be a little bit interesting. So
more than a little bit interesting, Trevor. Don't sell your research short.
You'll be on the edge of your seat. Yeah. But no, it's interesting. I got these quotes both from Wrestling Inc. over the years, transcribed a lot of stuff, and as always, for anyone, I think anyone can agree that if you do a wrestling podcast or any kind of wrestling written project, anyone that transcribes interviews and podcasts, you are close to sainthood. Every time you transcribe a wrestler podcast, you're a little closer to heaven, to earning God's love. It is so much easier as someone who has both had to transcribe things and gotten to just copy people's transcriptions. One is way preferable to the other. So, Wrestling Inc., thank you for transcribing Chris Van Vliet's podcasts with Colt and Colt's Art of Wrestling show, which I've kind of combined some quotes from those to get this. So we'll go to Colt from these shows talking about how he got around this time that WWE offers. So this is Colt here. It was 2006 or 2007, and everyone was getting signed at that point. Punk, Daivari, and these were the guys. Kendrick, just a lot of these guys from Ring of Honor, basically, that I was starting with were getting signed and moved up. Cabana added, I had done all these enhancement matches. You can go back on YouTube and look at my Jacked matches, Velocity, my Sunday Night Heat versus Snitsky and Hacksaw Jim Duggan and Trevor Murdoch, and he's another one of my friends who got signed. And just eventually everyone was saying, like, you should sign Colt. You should sign Colt. Daivari was pushing the hardest. He was like, you should sign Colt. I don't understand. I remember Matt Hardy said something after I wrestled him on Velocity. You should sign this guy. Regal was a proponent. And then the transcription continues and saying, this is not Colt. Apparently, Cabana was supposed to receive a tryout match over WrestleMania 23 weekend. However, the match was scrapped by an inebriated John Laurinaitis, and Cabana was just awarded a WWE contract instead. Going back to Colt here, quote, allegedly, Laurinaitis had too many cocktails at the WrestleMania party in Detroit, and everyone was like, I was supposed to get this tryout in the WrestleMania hotel where they have a ring set up, and I think he was just drinking all day, allegedly drinking all day, and he just never got to it, and I never had it. And finally, he was just like, do you want to do this? I was like, yes. He's like, all right, we're going to sign you to a contract. I was like, holy shit. That's where Hurricane Helms was in the bar, and he goes, we signed Colt Cabana. And the Undertaker goes, what's a Colt Cabana? Helms always reminds me of that story. And so that's how I got signed. Just all these guys saying, you should sign this guy. And it wasn't Vince McMahon. It wasn't Kevin Dunn. And that would later go to hurt me and bite me in the ass because they didn't sign me. They didn't know me. They weren't sold on me.
It's I don't interrupt too much, but
no, go on.
I think we all were like, this guy, of all the people who are stars in Ring of Honor, seemed in some ways like the most tailor-made for WWE. And it's crazy even still to hear that, like, no one who is important really knew him. Like,
Yeah,
it's just kind of crazy.
it kind of shows the chain of command where, John Laurinaitis, a guy who's currently in the news as we record this for not good reasons. He was in charge of telling, John Laurinaitis, famous in particular for signing the wrong one-legged wrestler and things like that. And so there, definitely there was a lot of people probably under his purview that he would get to have the power to hire without really the top being informed. And it's interesting that Colt kind of points to that as a negative for him. Like, yeah, I got the job, but the people that were real power players, if I made it to the main roster, they never endorsed me. They didn't even know who I was. So yeah, you can see how that would, the joys of being in a large labyrinthine, corporation where someone can hire you in the middle and the top and go, who is this guy? But, during the podcast, Cabana also talked about taking a 50% pay cut when he left the Indies and signed with the WWE. Cabana also recalled a friend telling him that if he signed with the WWE, that he would at least have the potential to establish a career. In the past, Cabana has also discussed who is responsible for him signing with the WWE, and this is back to Colt for another quote. Quote, "That's just what it was," shrugged Cabana. "I remember my friend who was in the same boat as me, maybe a year and a half before, and he said, this is the sacrifice you have to make because the potential is there, and the potential isn't there on the Indies." And that's fun. And what's funny is years later, when I came back to the Indies and I started my own thing, it got to the point in the 2012 or 2013 or whatever, where I was making more money than some of the lower card or even mid-card WWE guys, which was not a thing. I don't think it ever was a thing. It's crazy that I can sit there and say that. So,
when Danielson got fired from WWE in 2010, and he had that little run on the Indies for a couple months before they brought him back, didn't he have a conversation with Vince McMahon where he said, "I'm making more money on the Indies anyway"? And even Vince was shocked to hear that.
Yeah, we talked about that, I believe, on the 6-hour Danielson tribute episode, where that's like an anecdote from Bryant's book, where when he got fired for the choking Justin Roberts with the tie incident during the Nexus angle, and Vince calls on us like, "Sorry, but we have to do the sponsors, whatever." Danielson's like upbeat, like, "Don't worry, like, I'm going to make more on the Indies." And Vince is like, "What?" Like he doesn't even realize the economy of things at that era, where like a top indie name was going to make more than and that's something I don't think is true today, right? Like, I believe today they say the base salary, if you're on the main roster of WWE, is $350,000. And the indies are kind of diminished because there's more, AEW has sucked up a lot of the talent.
Right. Well, and also competition between promotions for talent obviously raises the asking price. So, so that's a big part of it too. That's like, when we say WWE had a monopoly for many years, despite the existence of TNA and whatever, they did have a monopoly for many years, and they could kind of set these salaries, and they often weren't that great.
But as we go through time, yeah, exactly. Because as we go through time, like, some younger fans coming up might not like be able to envision that there was like a brief window of time in kind of the era Colt talked about, where the very top earners on the indies, it would be a pay cut to sign a developmental deal with WWE, or going as far as Colt, like, if you got your foot in the door in WWE, because you could make a good deal of money if you really hustled, booked yourself out a lot, had outside revenue streams with your merch and stuff. And it was all for, like, I guess this unnamed source that, Colt's referencing a friend. It was basically the idea back then is if you're a top indie guy and you're signing with WWE, you're sacrificing the short term for this idea that you're buying a lottery ticket, where if you make it to WWE and you become a star of a significant level, you're going to make more money there than you could make anywhere else. But if you don't make it to that point and you're a certain level of indie guy, you're actually leaving money on the table. And that was a unique era of professional wrestling that I don't think we're going to go back to now.
Yeah, and there is also the thought that if you sign with WWE and take that pay cut, if you return to the indies, you're that much bigger of a star. Right? Yeah. So there's that too.
And that brings us to our show today. Obviously, we'll talk more about Colt at the end, but Good Times, Great Memories took place April 28th, 2007 at the Frontier Fieldhouse in Chicago Ridge, Illinois, in front of a reported crowd. Oh, Matt, go on.
I was going to say they sort of stole the sign out of our show, but they stole it, years before you invented it. They invented a time machine. Took have a good time, have a great time. And they were like, good time? What about great memories? So that's how it happened.
if Tony Khan really wants to put his money where his mouth is, investing in the Trevor Dane brand, he will. If Ring of Honor ever runs his last show, it will be called "Have a Good Time, Have a Great Time." I mean, it just has to. Like, you claim you know me. If you want it, you do the deep cuts, prove it. Anyway, this show, Good Times, Great Memories, drew a reported crowd of 850 fans. The Observer noted at the time that CM Punk, Maria, and Hornswoggle from WWE all came to the show because it was Cabana's farewell. All the stars are coming out, and legit stars in that case with CM Punk and even Maria and Hornswoggle. No need for the Norm Macdonald meme for that reading of that. And then Mike Johnson wrote in PW Insider, Ring of Honor's website at www.rohwrestling.com crashed the evening of the show due to heavy traffic of fans attempting to visit the site in the wake of several breaking news items, which we will get to throughout the show. But yeah, there was, somewhat surprising departure in a surprising way they did it. There was a big match announcement on the show, which we'll get to. Yeah, so I don't know how many times that happened in Ring of Honor history that the site actually crashed because people were just flooding it, but I guess this was one time. And we open with ROH interviewer Rebecca Bayless outside the building before the show with a line of fans waiting to get in. We pan and we see the line. It's pretty long. It's also pretty sunny, which immediately makes me feel guilty about how many hours of my life I spend inside. Well, I did go out for a lovely few hours yesterday, but this was like an incredibly pointless segment. I think it was literally just to show, hey, people are coming to the show, which is weird because it's not even like one of ROH's best attended shows. Like, it's a good crowd, but it was literally just there long enough to be like, there's a line to get into the show.
There was sort of something similar at the Fight of the Century show with the Danielson versus Joe match in New Jersey, where they're like, they are lined up. And I'm like, yeah, that is a line. I mean, there's nothing about it that screams that this is going to be massive or anything, but there was a line.
Yes, typically people line up to things
before the doors open while they're trying to get in. Yeah, there's often lines, even for things that aren't that well attended.
So next we cut to Jimmy Jacobs backstage. He tells us that the past 4 weeks, everywhere he's gone, malls in Michigan, gas stations in Pittsburgh, airports in Indianapolis. The people who know him, they all come up to him and ask the exact same thing. They talk about seeing the cage match he had with BJ Whitmer, and they ask him how it felt. Jimmy calls them idiots. He lost half a tooth. He tore his meniscus and his ACL in his left knee. How do you think it felt? That match left scars on Jimmy's body that he'll have for the rest of his life that will always remind him of that one night. But he says that match also changed him emotionally forever, but for the better. He says after that match, Lacey came up to him, and after doing everything she asked of him for over a year, Lacey offered herself up to Jimmy for one night in heaven, one night in ecstasy, just their bodies together. Jimmy says any other man in this locker room would have jumped at that opportunity, and Jimmy says, I really wanted to do it, but I didn't. We didn't engage in sexual intercourse. I didn't bang the broad like everyone backstage wants to high-five me for. Jimmy says, I knew it would just be one night of lust, and then it'd go back to just the way it was, and he doesn't want just one night. Jimmy says he knocked on death's door and bled buckets for a year. He pulls out a pill bottle at this point and says, this isn't my latest addiction, instead pouring out its contents into his hand to reveal it's the half of his tooth that got knocked out in the cage match with Whitmer. He points out that his front tooth is now porcelain. It's not 100% real. Jimmy then pulls down his pants and undoes a bandage on his knee, revealing stitches, scars, and swelling from the recent surgeries on his meniscus and ACL. Jimmy says he didn't deal with all of this to have a one-night stand. Jimmy says he's got news for us. Even dogs bang. Cats bang. Every animal on the planet bangs. That's nothing. It's meaningless. It takes a man, a human with balls, a person like Jimmy, to love. He'll be damned if the first time he has sex with Lacey is anything but consummating their love. Although Jimmy says consternating instead of consummating. Mixes up the words here. Jimmy says he loves Lacey with everything he has, that he feels like she's close to loving him too. Jimmy's taken this time not to bang the broad, but to do something not one of these apes in the locker room can do, romance the woman that he loves. Jimmy at this point gets up on his crutches and in pain limps away. Matt, I thought this was a good promo. It did a good job of kind of establishing where the storyline was at this point. I did chuckle, not maybe in a good way, at him start going, dogs bang, cats bang, just that verbiage in the middle of a very serious promo. And I did feel like at 7 minutes, this was on the verge of being too long and him starting to repeat himself a bit. But overall, I thought this was a good promo.
Yeah, I tend to, I think, be higher than you on Jimmy Jacobs promos in general during the storyline. I think, he's the current person in this particular locker room that really, puts a lot of deep thought into his character and where his storyline is going and seems to be very hands-on with it. And, he lays it all out, and I think he does a really good job here. There's some stumbling over words and stuff like that, so it wasn't his smoothest promo, but I think the content is very thought out. I like that he's continuing on with this character of, he's the emo kid that, it hates the brutishness of the dumb jocks in the wrestling locker room. I think we're coming close to some payoff for the storyline that eventually goes in a really interestingly different direction over the next few months. So I appreciated it. Obviously it's silly and it's kind of childish, but that works for this character too. So I appreciated everything that he put into this, into the progression of the storyline.
And one thing Jimmy is good at is having a progression in storylines. Like a lot of wrestlers and wrestling companies, they'll be like, the story is A through C, and we basically stay at step A and do that over and over again for a while, then do step B over and over again for a while, and then C. And Jimmy's storylines, there's some repetition in his stuff too, but there is definitely a lot more of it's more instead of A to C, it's more like A to E or A to F. There's a lot of, this happened, and this happened, and this happened. You feel like there's more events leading you to the end of whatever the storyline is. But there was one match on this show that we did not get to see, did not make the DVD. It was a dark match. Lacey, escorted to the ring by Jimmy Jacobs, defeated Laura Matano in 2 minutes, 14 seconds. Laura Matano, she did a few years of women's wrestling on the indie scene, and she also, maybe to some fans, might be best known as a referee for Shimmer. And it is yet another one of those. I mean, I know all dark matches in Ring of Honor are usually pretty short, but it's amazing that, even in a non-televised match, the women get 2 minutes. That's almost at the point of why bother? Just barely above why bother level amounts of time.
Yeah, right. They were getting better. They actually had a couple matches on the recent shows where it's this is enough time to bother. And then they go right back to that for a 2-minute nothing match before the show.
And that brings us to the opener we saw on DVD. 6-Man Mayhem. Delirious defeated Gran Akuma, Hallowicked, Jigsaw, Mike Quackenbush, and Pele Primo in 10 minutes, 29 seconds when he pinned Akuma with the chemical imbalance too. This match cuts out the entrances as we join it with everyone in the ring about to shake hands, which is more of a rarity for this era of Ring of Honor after they started to be able to have their DVDs, the technology to have their DVDs run a fair bit over 3 hours. But I guess this show is so packed that even on a disc that is 3 hours and 39 minutes, something had to go. I mean, there's other stuff they could have cut, but they cut that. Kevin Steen was originally supposed to be in Pele's spot, but he had to pull out of this weekend for undisclosed reasons. We mentioned that on the last show. Also notable is Jigsaw is wrestling here, taking bumps and everything after he got knocked out in his ROH match the night before. Probably not the best choice. Probably something that wouldn't have been allowed to happen a few months after this for obvious reasons in wrestling history, but it happens here. Matt, what'd you think about this? It's a big-time Chikara match, basically.
Yeah, I mean, Pele's involvement got him to, gave him another chance to show out a little bit, and I think he continues to hold his own with these, really well-regarded indie stars of the era. And I really like this match. I think that these Chikara guys did a good job of freshening up the undercards, and I think that the crowd felt the same way. I think they were excited to see these guys. And, whenever Quack is in, there's just something about the way he moves that's different from everybody else. He does that. He's some of the stuff where he works with Pele. It's kind of interesting, actually. All of the Chikara guys, it's they get to be big power wrestlers against Pele Primo because Pele is so strong, and that they don't really get a chance to do that any other time. Quack does that wacky upside thing where he holds Pele upside down and puts his arm out like he's surfing. I don't even know how to describe that. But if you've seen it, you know what I'm talking about. You know what I'm talking about, right, Trevor? Yeah. And, when Hallowicked and Quack are in, you can tell they're doing sequences that they've done a million times together. And, there's a point where Jigsaw is being held by a Gran Akuma, and Akuma uses him to kick Hollow Wicked, and then Jigsaw goes into a spinning head scissors. I kind of always have a fun time when you see a bunch of guys who've worked together elsewhere debut in ROH, because they sort of play the hits, and they have such a polished routine with each other that there's something fun about it. You know what I mean? But then they have a different dynamic with Delirious. I mean, Delirious was in Chikara plenty also, right? So he has lots of experience with these guys too. But Delirious does this thing where he like in Delirious Ease, he tells Hollow Wicked, like, you wear green and black, and you got the stem, and I got the tassels, and he tries to bond with him, and they team up as green and black masked guys, and they attack the others, and they shake hands. Then there's a spot where Jigsaw drops Hollow Wicked off the apron on Akuma's shoulders, and then Quackenbush dives onto both of them when they're in like the, I guess, chicken fight position. And I'd say in the latter stages of the match, it goes so fast that it's hard to keep up with. And I mean that in a good way. Like, the crowd was hot. The Chikara guys, I thought, brought energy and personality. So I thought this was a hoot. I really thought this was a very enjoyable 6-way spot fest opener. A nice way to open a show like this. Certainly a very indie style match, but just fun. And with a good crowd, a fun match is sometimes what I want to start a show.
Sometimes you don't want a fun match. No, but I know exactly what you mean. I agree here. I've talked about ROH's tendency to often try out new wrestlers in multi-man matches like this, where each wrestler only gets a couple of minutes of ring time and you're usually forced to work a spot fest where you can't really show everything you do as a well-rounded wrestler. And usually I think that's a real bad way to try out wrestlers, but I don't think it's a bad way for this match, because in a sense, it's not 4 new guys on their first weekend all fighting over their share of 10 minutes to make these individual impressions. It is in some sense, obviously, I'm sure they all want to stand out, but it's really 4 guys working as one to sell Chikara as a whole to the Ring of Honor fans and to the Ring of Honor booker. And if you consider, like you just said, if you consider that Delirious by this point in time was at the very least a semi-regular, if not outright regular in Chikara, he was actually already in a tag team with Hollow Wicked in Chikara called Incoherence. Everyone in this match except Pelly's a Chikara wrestler, basically making this was like a Chikara offer match. And that's something else I think Chikara like to do. Like, if you looked at their this era of the indies, they like to send a group of their guys to a new promotion and work against each other in a match. So rather than like try to integrate with other wrestlers, they were going to be, like you said, in their comfort zone, giving a new fans of like, hey, this is the kind of wrestling you're going to get if you buy a Chikara DVD, if you go to a Chikara live event. But and this is, I thought, a good version of your standard ROH multi-man spot fest. These guys are very comfortable with each other, obviously. They have a lot of neat things and moves to show that probably most of these fans, or a lot of them, hadn't seen. Pelly fits in with the match well enough, even though he's not a Chikara guy. Sometimes these ROH multi-mans, they can almost feel like auditions rather than matches. And this one kind of had that vibe. But again, I think like this one time, it worked, because this match, the story of this match almost really was everyone was auditioning as like a collective unit. And the story of this match, more than which one guy would win or some feud, was the stars of this other promotion are introducing themselves to like the biggest US indie on the scene. Quack is probably the standout. He gets another nice reaction this weekend when he first tags in, just like he did the night before. And when he hits the standout spot of the match, which you mentioned, the basically like the doomsday, it's like a tope doomsday device on the floor. The crowd loves that. I thought everyone had their moments, but other than Quack, I thought Gran Akuma really made an impression here. He's stuff like his kick where his opponent is bent over, and he basically takes a back bump and then throws his feet in their face as they're bent over as he does it. That stuff's really neat. People like that. So yeah, even though I don't usually think shortish 4 6-way spot fests are usually the best way to debut new wrestlers, I think for these guys, it wasn't an absolute tear down the house show stealer, but was an outright good spot fest, better than the median ROH one. And a nice heaping handful of fun.
Yeah, and I do want to echo what you said early. It's crazy that Jigsaw was wrestling here. Like, he clearly was like knocked loopy. And again, it was less than 24 hours prior.
Yeah, and if you watch this, like when I saw this, I was like, I didn't remember watching, what my thoughts of this match were the first time I watched it all those years ago. So I was like, well, maybe this is one of those matches since it's 6-way they kind of protect him. It's like, no, he takes a decent amount of bumps. Like it doesn't really feel like they're going easy on him or just have him do a couple select spots. He's, a part of this match as much as anyone. Delirious also got a Colt Cabana chant going to start the match, so that was a nice way to start the show. After the match, Hal Wicked raises Delirious's arm, so a little nod to the fact that they are a tag team in Chikara. The crowd launches into a loud "Please come back" chant for the Chikara boys after the match. And so, yeah, overall between this and the stuff on the last show, the Battle of St. Paul, this was like a very successful weekend, I would say, for the Chikara guys. Like in terms of getting really good crowd reactions, making a good first impression. Obviously, other than the one horrible thing, which was Jigsaw getting knocked loopy or out on the night before, I don't think it could have gone much better for them in the opportunities they were given this weekend.
Yeah, but it's interesting. We'll get to talk about it in the future. Really, the only one that becomes a permanent member of the ROH roster out of that crew is Jigsaw, right? Like Quack shows up a bunch more times, and Hollow Wicked maybe a little bit too. I don't recall seeing much more of Gran Akuma, and maybe a little bit. But it's interesting that that it really is just sort of like a brief little run, but they don't stay.
Yeah, I think some of those guys, I think I'm just going up to Cage just to make sure I didn't hallucinate it. But, yeah, I'm just trying to see. Yeah,
I know. Yeah, I know Quack is there at least through the summer, but not all the time.
Yeah, but no, I was looking at like Gran Akuma and guys like that. Some of those guys, Gabe does end up using them a fair bit in Dragon Gate USA. So maybe that would have been something he would have gone back to if he hadn't left. But yeah, he's still here for over another year. And yeah, none of these guys really gain significant traction. And the only guy that they really attempt to find a real notable spot for is Jigsaw. So like you said, we then get the first of many highlight clips tonight of Colt Cabana's ROH career. It's labeled Best Times, Best Memories. And this first one is Colt and Punk arguing in a car at the Night of the Butcher, the show which was Colt's ROH debut all the way back in 2002. So they do this sometimes. It is, interesting that he gets kind of like the Samoa Joe CM Punk style treatment, right? Like this show is very celebratory of him, and not everyone gets that kind of treatment. So, and that brings us to our second match of the show. That is Christopher Daniels escorted to the ring by Allison Danger versus Eric Stevens. And that match goes to a 15-minute time limit draw. This is Christopher Daniels' last match in the Sapolsky era of Ring of Honor. So also the last match of his we'll ever cover on Through the Years, barring some incredible twist of fate that I am not planning on. He won't wrestle again for Ring of Honor until mid-2010, so about 3 years. And I can tell you, we have no plans to cover mid-2010 Ring of Honor. So after that, we talk about the match, we can all obviously talk about Danger and Daniels. But in terms of this match, I presumed the 15-minute time limit draw was to try and have Daniels put over a young prospect they had like high hopes for, and this is the best they could do for a finish without drawing the ire of TNA, but who knows? Like, Daniels had lost over in ROH this year, including the night before to Roderick Strong, but they were always, a lot of them were kind of weird losses. Like, even that match was like this, against Roddy the night before, was this slip on a banana peel, fluke, count out, I cut loss, where he literally catches his foot in a guardrail and can't get it out in time. I don't hate draws in wrestling, but as always, I do hate 15-minute time limits in random matches in a promotion where they never do 15-minute time limits. It makes no sense why just randomly one match would have it when most matches don't. And when out of nowhere we get a 1 minute left time call over the PA for a promotion that almost never does time calls, you can hear groans. And of course, that being so out of the ordinary, it instantly tips off. This match is going to be a 15-minute time limit draw. But getting to the match quality, I would say we've gone over numerous times on the show, including in depth on the previous episode, which Matt again did a great job kind of summing it up. Daniels being in a rut as a singles in ROH from 2006 on, this like return run. And I'm not going to go through that whole spiel again here. We've gone through it a few times before, but this match does to me join that club of Daniels matches where the execution's on point. They're missing any kind of spark. On one hand, this match does have like a fairly defined story. There's some substance to it. Like Daniels tries early to deal with Stevens' size. He tries to take him down with flying tackles. That doesn't work. So eventually he works over Stevens' midsection. And I did like that because Daniels loves, like no other wrestler I've ever seen in my life, to do matches where he works over, or sometimes where he has someone work over his midsection. So in a way, I was kind of like charmed to be like, he's going out the way he came in. He's with that good old midsection work. I was like, good on you, Daniels. That's nostalgia. But like, on the other hand, I feel like for Stevens, who at this point is very early in his ROH tenure, and he's trying to connect with this audience and get over, it's the wrong kind of match for him. Because I feel like you'd want him to go hard and fast to try and wow fans. And I realized that going to a 15-minute time limit draw, it might hamper that. Maybe you have to pace yourself a bit more for that. But even then, like, it's a match where Stevens spends a fair bit of time on defense selling his tummy, and it just felt like that's the wrong match I would have if I was trying to push Stevens like right out of the gate. I'd want him to just lay waste to people. There's also the fact that Daniels is playing heel here, but in a way that makes him the star of the match, and actually, like, there's a way to play heel that encourages cheers, and Daniels does that here. Like, he's standing on Stevens while he's holding onto the ropes, and each time the ref gets to 4 on a 5 count, Daniels switches his hand and then grabs the ropes with the other hand, so the ref has to start the count again. And it's one of those moves where, like, it's cheating, but it's cutesy cheating that is going to get a pop from the crowd because it's funny and fun. And at one point in the middle of the match, Daniels just stops and poses. And it's like, of course you're going to get a pop when you do that. If one of the goals of this match was to get Daniels booed, this match was a huge failure. But of course, he will fix that a few minutes after the match. But overall, I would say this isn't a bad match. The opening with Daniels bouncing off Stevens, and the end where Stevens at the end, he does get to hit some power moves for a few minutes, and he ends the match with at the time limit with Daniels is in real trouble. He's holding onto Stevens' legs, desperately trying to block Stevens as he's going for his finisher, the doctor bomb. Those front and back sections, they do try and put over Stevens, but for one of your top prospects of the moment facing like one of your top most over roster veterans on his last night in, I would have wanted Stevens to come out of this with a little more juice than it feels like he does. And there is also a way he gets kind of treated after the match that I didn't like. But as it is, I would say like this is a strong, competent, above average level match.
Yeah, I liked it a little bit more than you, like not enough to really like argue, but I thought it was one of Daniels' better singles performances that we've seen in a while. I mean, I guess he hasn't had a ton of singles matches, but like I liked him more than the match he had with Roderick Strong the previous night, and obviously that is not something that you'd expect because Roderick Strong is one of the best wrestlers in the company. And maybe it was just he got to be the night before he flattened his entire personality because he didn't want to work heel, right? And he wasn't also working babyface, so he just had nothing. Yeah. And on this night, at least he plays up the heel, even if he does it in a way that's maybe counterproductive sometimes. And in the early part of the match, there was a lot of movement. There weren't a lot of rest holds. It was, they weren't doing anything super dynamic, but they were moving fast. And then there was a spot where while Daniels is working over the midsections, he picks up Stevens and he drops him stomach and ribs first on the back of an open chair, which that seemed really, really painful. Like, that's a pretty memorable spot. And like you said, the spot where he keeps releasing his hands to get the crowd to pop while he has the hold on, while he's standing on Stevens' midsection and stuff. But yeah, like down the stretch, Stevens gets to show some of his power moves. But like you said, when they call for the 1 minute remaining, it's just weird. Like, everything just felt weird at that point because it's so contrived, it's so out of the norm that it just becomes distracting. I did notice that Daniels hit a code breaker during the match, which I didn't think about as a move before Jericho did it, but this is definitely before Jericho did it. Did Daniels do that move a lot, and I just didn't think about it until now?
I don't think he did it a lot, and it's interesting because we're not far from code breaking Chris Jericho.
Right, he debuts at the end of 2007, I believe. So
yeah, in fact, I was just doing advanced prep for future episodes because I like to be ahead on some of the prep, and I was just reading a story where people were debating in the Observer, did WWE steal the Chris Jericho code break? We'll get into it when it comes up, but did Chris Jericho steal the code breaking Mystery Man online stuff from 9 Inch Nails, or did he steal it from Ring of Honor with the Project 161, who stole it from 9 Inch Nails? So it's it's like we're entering a very Jericho era. It's interesting.
It's it's funny when they talk about Jericho, like the whole code breaking thing. That was the first time I remember ever hearing the term like, oh, he's doing like a viral ad campaign online. Like I had never heard that term before. That in late 2007. Kind of interesting, right?
Yeah, that is interesting. It's crazy because that might be like. It definitely was the early era of wrestling, of the idea like we're going to use the internet and like these little hints and like, and it's weird because you are probably right. Like that might be the first example for me too. I remember there was like maybe one thing, like a brief era before that where, do you remember that era where it was like, there was all these like, assisted reality or whatever, like these, like we planted a clue, in this park that you've got to find, and then you enter the website for a secret website. There was a lot of like weird like stuff like that where they were trying to like, there's something in reality that will crack it, that will link into something we're doing on the internet, but it was not as integrated and as smooth, I guess, as it would quickly become.
Yeah, I remember that stuff. The actual like phrase viral to describe it, I had never heard before 2007, and I don't know when it was first invented, but it sounds about right that would be like when it started. And I'm sure like wrestling didn't invent that term, but I'd heard people use that term to describe what Jericho was doing. Anyway, the match, I thought in the end, like, there was some like working all the time they spent working on Steven's stomach. I thought he kind of completely ignored it in the final stretch, as one of those. But like the match never rose to the level of intensity that would be needed for it to be like what I describe as a very good match. But I would call it like a pretty good match and better than I feel like I usually got from Daniels.
One other thing I have to mention too, which is, you were talking about, when Stevens and Daniels saw on the outside and Daniels did the gourd buster on the open chair, which was one of the cooler moments of the match. I believe we have to add Eric Stevens to the long list of ROH wrestlers that have been cut by the sheet metal guardrail signs, because as soon as he goes into a guardrail here, you can see him clutching his stomach a little bit, like checking the skin of his stomach. And although we don't see blood until the very next move he takes, which is the gourd buster, I kept rewinding and I'm like pretty sure he's like the 18th wrestler during the tenure of this podcast who got cut taking a move into the sheet metal guardrail signs in Ring of Honor, even though I think they were supposed to have like fixed them by now, but it still happens. So, I think Jay Briscoe happened to a few shows ago. It just happens. So after the match, Dave Prazak does the hard sell on commentary for Stevens. You can tell Gabe's told him like, look, we've really got to push Stevens here, even though it's just a time limit draw, because you can hear Prazak's just shouting, momentum was on Stevens' side. He was seconds away from winning with the Dr. Bomb. The crowd chants 5 more minutes, and Stevens grabs the mic. Eric says he knows he's the new guy around here, but all these people just saw him take Christopher Daniels to the limit, and he was seconds away from finishing him off.
The crowd definitely laughed a little bit when he said he was seconds away from finishing him off. Which is very immature. Very immature. It's immature of you to laugh too, Trevor.
Yeah, Chicago most. Well, I'm just laughing. Well, look, with vermin like Dr. Keith Lipinski in that crowd, what do you expect? Do you expect any better from Chicago? These sausage lovers. But so why? I did not mean that in any other way, but the literal, they love a good hot dog there. They love a Polish. They love the Wiener Circle.
Trevor, you're problematic today. You're just.
I'm digging, and I'll eventually get out to the other side. That's how it works, right, Matt?
Yeah, no, but it's true. Like they like sausage is what they put on their pizza, and that's just what we mean. Like,
have you ever had a Chicago style hot dog? Because I've had a few hot dogs in my life. I have never, and I know now you're a vegetarian, but you could have a Chicago style vegan hot dog. There are some decent vegan, vegetarian hot dog options, but have you ever had like the pickle spear, the neon green relish, the celery salt, the whole shebang?
No, actually, I've never had a Chicago style vegetarian hot dog, which I would. And I think I had not been to Chicago before I was a vegetarian. I've been a vegetarian now for 19 years. So I'd never been to Chicago before that. So I never had a regular Chicago hot dog. Do you want us to meet up and get Chicago style hot dogs, Trevor?
If we met up, I'd be enjoying one of your famous pizza tours. But I said this: I love neon green relish. I have enjoyed some neon green relish.
On what?
On a hot dog. I just have not added the celery, salt, the addition of a pickle spear, and the tomato. I like tomato sauce, a big slice of tomato. I mean, if you have a really great tomato, maybe. That's the one thing. And the sport peppers, I don't know. You know what? I love most peppers. Something about calling them sport peppers, that seems weird. Something about the name sport peppers is throwing me off. I don't even
think I knew that about sport peppers.
I think that might be a thing. Maybe I'm wrong here. I don't know. Maybe
on food stuff, Trevor, I trust you.
And so anyway, after that diversion that we got on, Stevens asks, why don't we give the people what they want? Put 5 more minutes on that clock. We can keep wrestling. Daniels then grabs the mic and he asks the crowd, do you want 5 more minutes? They say yes. Daniels says he has something to say, and so he's going to tell Eric Stevens no. He's going to pull his veteran status card and tell Stevens to vacate the premises. And the thing I was referring to earlier, I thought Stevens looked a little bit like a punk here because he just, without really arguing or anything, just very quietly and submissively like, Daniels told me to leave. Okay, I'm leaving. And that's it, and he goes to the back. The crowd doesn't really boo Daniels for this even. It just has the effect of making Stevens look a little bit just meek. But Daniels then starts his promo. He goes, it's been 2 years now since he came back to Ring of Honor, 2 years since his exile ended. And as he stands here in the middle of this ring, he's just got to say, he should have never come back. And that gets a mix of cheers and boos, actually, that line. That was interesting. Daniel says, when he was gone, he fought tooth and nail every day to come back. And now that he's here, the fans don't even care. They act like he's inconsequential. He's been taken for granted by this company and worse by these fans. He came back to Ring of Honor to become world champion. But when was the last time he was even given the opportunity to earn a world title shot? No. Instead, he's wrestling in filler matches where it doesn't matter if he wins or loses. 4 corner scrambles, opening matches. All he's been doing at ROH is treading water. And what happened when he and Matt Sydal became tag team champions? You people acted like those belts belonged to Aries and Strong or the Briscoes. The fans acted like me and Sydal were a couple of ham sandwiches, and the fans couldn't wait until they lost the titles. To Daniel's point, I will say the crowd does cheer a little bit when he says that. Daniels then asks why the fans gave up on him when he never gave up on them. Was it TNA? Just because he's part of TNA doesn't mean he didn't bust his ass every time he stepped in a Ring of Honor ring. That actually gets some applause and some cheers from the fans. They agree on that. It's very interesting to use the crowd's reactions line by line here as like a gauge on if they agree with each point he's makes. Because some they seem to and some they don't. Anyway, Daniel says the only people that think there's a rivalry between TNA and ROH are the ROH fans. Not the TNA office, not the ROH office, not the wrestlers, just these ROH fans. The fans here, they act like just because he works for TNA, he's restricted in what he can do for Ring of Honor. The fans here have been making him pay because of a choice he was forced to make over 3.5 years ago. Daniel says he made the right decision then, and if he had to make that decision again, he'd choose TNA all over again. And that gets, I would say, the first real substantial boost of the promo. Daniels asks the fans if they want to know why he left. He says, put his bank statement next to Bryan Danielson's and you'll know why. He makes a 6-figure salary in TNA. 1 million people see him every week on TNA television. What has ROH ever done for him? Do you idiots think because I can feed my daughter because you chant this is awesome? The crowd starts chanting this is awesome to heckle him. Do you think that when his son is sick, the doctor gives him medicine because you type on the internet that he had a 4-star match with Austin Aries? I do like that Daniels was a little more realistic. Like, he's not going to claim 5 stars. He's like, I couldn't have a 4-star match with Austin Aries.
Back then, like, was 4 was the equivalent of what 5 would be now. As I think most people listening know. I'm not exaggerating at all, by the way.
So Daniel says, I'm sick and tired of being judged by all the fans when they have less than no knowledge of what it takes to be a professional wrestler. They don't know one thing about the effort and dedication it takes to step in this ring. Daniels can't believe he ever wanted to commit to ROH full time. He asks, why should he stay here? So they can use him up the same way they used up Samoa Joe? And that line get some boos. Daniel says he'll tell us a little tidbit. The reason TNA took Joe away from Ring of Honor was to protect him from you people. That gets some boos. Now he's really getting the crowd riled up. He says TNA knew Joe would have killed himself just to make ROH fans happy, but they'd never be happy. Joe's only been gone for 2 months and you've already forgotten about him. You've forgotten Samoa Joe. You've forgotten CM Punk. And Daniel says, I give you 1 week before you forget about what Colt Cabana has ever done for you. And that gets some boos. Daniel says the fans are already waiting for the next young kid to show up, someone like Davey Richards, Rocky Romero, Delirious, so they can bleed them dry too. Daniel says it's not going to be him. He's not going to give us one more minute of his time, one more drop of his sweat, one more beat of his heart, just so they can piss it all away. He's announcing the official Christopher Daniels farewell tour. It starts right now and ends the minute he walks through that curtain, because as far as he's concerned, you've seen his last Ring of Honor match. A fan at this point throws a streamer at the ring as the crowd starts chanting, na 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 na, hey, 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 goodbye. Daniel says, these fans just break my heart. He never thought he'd say this, but Ring of Honor can go to hell. He quits. Some fans at this point chant, don't come back. And at this point, we get a concerned Allison Danger. She tries to talk to Daniels, but he shoves her hard to the mat and yells at her while she seems to be on the verge of tears. The crowd boos that very hard and chants, fuck you, Daniels, as Daniels leaves telling various fans that they could fuck off. This was a very good promo, a very memorable promo. I would quibble with just a couple things with it. I would say, first off, one of the central points of it being that the fans turned on him after he came back to ROH and held it against him that he left for a while. I think most ROH fans were actually very understanding of why he left, and many of them were likely even aware of the reporting that was coming out at the time that he was pushing hard for TNA to allow him back. He always got pops as soon as he returned to Ring of Honor. He was like over until his last night in this show. In fact, I'd argue he was more over and got bigger reactions on this comeback ROH run at some points than his performances at times warranted. Like, he was always over. He didn't even really get booed hardly on this promo until midway through when he really started pushing the TNA stuff of it. When he was just doing the first part of the promo, just like ROH has been underusing me and stuff like that, the crowd isn't really totally against him. But again, when he got to that second half where he's complaining about the random ways when he complains about the TNA stuff, and the part where he is complaining at the start about the random ways he would booked, I think, that stuff does have some validity to it. And then the other thing that I, have some problems with would be, Allison Danger. She will be back for one very, how should we say, controversial,
unfortunate angle. Following year, yeah.
It feels bad that, like, the last time we see her, she's used for, like, a cheap way to get heel heat, as often is the case in ROH. And when she's brought back, it's in very similar vein, only worse. Yeah. And nothing comes of it. This is her goodbye, too. Like, they don't book her after this. She doesn't really get to say goodbye. Not that everyone needs to say goodbye, but it's just... It's very par for the course for ROH, right? Just have one get hit, use that as a way to get cheap heat, and then just move on. But before we talk about Daniel's career, Matt, what did you think about this promo? Because, there's a lot to this, right? Yeah, I had the same problems as you had, and I think it hurt the promo more for me. I did not think that this was as good as maybe a lot of people think it was. Besides what you said, like, it's also just, I feel like, was long and kind of all over the map. To the point where it got almost incoherent at points, like not literally, but like the argument got a little incoherent. The idea that he was underutilized by ROH in kayfabe terms and like didn't get title shots and was wrestling in filler matches, and then he himself acknowledges that he was a tag team champion, and he also had an FIP title shot the night before. So I just don't see how what he says tracks with how ROH has been presenting him. Like, yeah, he wasn't in the main event, but he definitely got a couple of he got, as far as I can count, didn't get at least 3 ROH World title shots in 2005, right? I think I looked up his last title challenge where he actually got a title shot. I think it was Danielson early on in Danielson's title run. But like right when he came back, they put him right up against Punk during the Summer of Punk. Like, and the 4-way against Punk too. So he got several title shots. Then he switched to tag team wrestling. Was a tag team champion. Got a lot of title shots before that. So like, he got to main event shows against Samoa Joe. So I don't think in kayfabe terms, I don't think it really tracks. The TNA stuff was pretty easy heat for him, and I'm sure there was some honesty to it, but this promo did not land for me. I guess it was probably the best way to write him out in general, and yeah, I agree with you about
how like it's sad that like Danger just was a onlooker in all of this, a bystander, didn't get to really have any agency. Like, and again, the way that ROH presented Allison Danger, the entirety of her presentation after Daniels came back, I found problematic because she was a real dynamic character the first run with the Prophecy. Like, she had a personality, she did promos, she was a force. And I don't understand why they just decided to make her just someone who stands there and like looks on, like, and does cheers and stuff while Daniels is wrestling. That decision is baffling to me because she clearly had more to offer than that. They let her wrestle matches, and some of the matches she's definitely gotten better as a wrestler and had good matches. But even then, doesn't really do promos, doesn't really get to be a character. It's perplexing. And here she could have absolutely played a role in making this a more interesting angle and promo, and they just didn't let her. So that bothers me too. So I wasn't all in on this, but I guess we'll have a conversation now about Daniels himself. But yeah. I mean, it was for the best at this moment. He was beyond stale in ROH. He wasn't enhancing the shows at all. He was already doing fine in TNA. Like, I don't want to say he overstayed his welcome in ROH, but he just wasn't landing, and it wasn't working for me, so I did not lament him leaving.
And even though I liked his promo more than you did, I do agree with like one of your central points there, which is it is uneven. It did really feel like you said, like it wasn't focused. It was like him just throwing like, what's every single thing I can complain about that feels kind of shooty and might have some basis in reality. And you can see not all of it is something the fans are like disagreeable to. And so it's this, and like you were saying, not all of it necessarily is completely based in reality, even though it all kind of has that flavor. Like when you think about, like you were saying, like the title stuff, it doesn't all, when you sit down and think about it, go, well, actually that doesn't quite make sense. Like some of it does. The other thing I thought was interesting in that promo before we move on was and this is a sign of things to come, because between this show and the next show is when ROH announces they're going to pay-per-view and TNA pulls their talent and all that. It's interesting that one thing that ROH was pretty careful about was, especially after the first TNA ROH fallout during the Feinstein scandal, was Gabe was always very complimentary of TNA, and they really tried to protect TNA in a sense as good as they could, because like say when Joe made that comment late in 2006 on one of the shows about how he couldn't wrestle that show because he was hurt because he tripped over some bad booking on the way here, they edited that out of the DVD. Whenever fans chanted "fuck TNA," they never had the announcers acknowledge it or ever talk about it. And this is a promo that explicitly by the second half is really pitting TNA, even if some of those arguments are valid, against ROH fans and getting them encouraging them and inflaming that hatred. So maybe a sign. It was interesting to see that, like, this was probably the most overt thing ROH ever allowed up to this point on their product, on like the DVDs, to be like, yeah, we're kind of pitting you against them, but
well, there was no reason to be like so having such kid gloves with them now that they're not co-booking star wrestlers anymore. So like, why bother, being so careful?
So before we get to Danger and Daniels, I'll just read quickly from The Observer. Dave wrote in The Observer, Chicago saw Christopher Daniels do his heel quitting speech, which he had cleared ahead of time with TNA management. His leaving had been in the plans for a while, but after doing the Joe Farewell tour and then the deal with Cabana, they pretty well couldn't do another. Daniels may return as a heel at some point, but nothing is specifically planned. Allison Danger's finishing up was just a matter of having been there since the early days of the promotion. Danger could also return at some point, but there is also nothing planned. And then we'll go to Brian Alvarez at the Figure 4 Weekly, who added, Allison Danger is also done with ROH as a regular after this weekend. She'll be coming in for occasional Shimmer matches down the road, but is finished as a regular. And I could say she doesn't come back for Shimmer offer matches, at least unless they're dark matches that Cage Match did not pick up on. Again, we'll get to eventually the stupid, again, like man on woman violence angle that she comes back for. But yeah, this is the end for her. So I guess we'll talk about Danger first. I'll go first on that, and then when you talk about Danger, I'll also let you have first crack at Daniels. But for Danger, she does come back for Ring of Honor post-Gape, I will say. She has, according to KSR, she has a dark match against Sarah Del Rey for an HD Net TV taping in 2009. And we'll see her again for that angle in 2008. But, there's a theme with almost everyone we're going to say goodbye to today, Matt, which is it's bittersweet, where they all actually have good legacies in circles of wrestling, but they all didn't get, I think you can make arguments that pretty much all of them didn't get what they deserved. And starting with Allison, I would say there was obviously a huge limit to what a woman was going to be able to do in the Sapolsky era of ROH or in U.S. women's wrestling in general at this point, period. And while some, I would say, her biggest contributions to wrestling came with her being one of the founders with Dave Prazak of Shimmer. There is something to give her some props for ROH. I will say there's something to be said for Allison Danger is that she, as a woman in a promotion as hostile to women as early Ring of Honor was, for 5 years found fairly consistent work there. Like, she was part of the first in-ring segment on the first ROH show, even though it was also the first instance of man-on-woman violence that they did consistently for over a year. But,
also the worst and most offensive segment in ROH history. Disgusting homophobia and stuff, and the man-on-woman violence to boot. But yes, probably not her favorite legacy, but it is something you can put on in your cap that, yes, she was the first segment in ROH in the ring.
But there's just something admirable too about there was so little oxygen for women in ROH, and there were so few roles they were willing to give them. But whatever roles they were giving to women, she had them all, right? She was a manager for multiple acts. She was a wrestler whenever they allowed people to wrestle. Even when Daniels was gone, they liked her enough to keep her on as a manager for the Prophecy until he came back. She had charisma. She clearly had passion for wrestling and a desire to improve in the ring, which I think she did over the 5 years. And she's, I think, a part of that lost generation, or maybe multiple generations, of U.S. women's wrestlers who were trying to get jobs in a world that didn't exist for them yet, where women's wrestling could not only be like a regular feature in national U.S. promotions, but it would be taken seriously and not just as this novelty or just a vehicle to titillate people. That world exists now. Unfortunately, she's one of those people that, she was in a generation where, even though she helped build the bridge to that generation, she wasn't around to really reap the benefits of it, which I think is sad. But for those who know, what she did with Shimmer and things like that, and even for people like us that watched the first 5 years, she was, like you said, a consistently charismatic. They could have done more with her. I'm not going to say she's one of the best mouthpieces or managers of all time or in that era, but she always did pretty good for what she was given.
Yeah, I mean, I think I said a lot of what I was thinking a few minutes ago. What you said is absolutely true. I think one of her greatest legacies, and a truly great legacy, is helping to found Shimmer with Dave Prazak. That's a big fucking deal. That changed American wrestling in a way that I don't think we talk enough about. You know what I mean? It's a really, really important contribution. As far as ROH itself, I think, I've said before, I think she should be in an ROH Hall of Fame because of how much she did in those first 2 years. And yeah, I think I was saying before, since when Daniels came back, the way they treated her as a performer, I think, she got to do the wrestling matches and stuff, but everything she did involving Daniels, I think, was disrespectful to her abilities. She literally just stood there while he did promos. She literally just cheered and got the crowd to clap along when Daniels was having his boring matches. She was there to wear really short skirts and do the entrance with him, and then clap along. But before that, she was in the first run of Daniels, she was the voice of the Prophecy. And she had a really fully fledged character, and she cut promos all the time, and she was involved in angles. And yes, there was a ban on women violence, which is terrible. But she was a focal point in a lot of those angles. And then when Daniels left, she became an important part of the storyline with Moff and Whitmer, and getting trying to get back at them. And she, again, had a character. And then Daniels came back and just poof, they took her personality away. And it was again, like the word I used before, perplexing. I didn't understand. I still don't understand why they did that. Doesn't make any sense to me. But she showed that, yes, wasn't the world's greatest promo, wasn't the world's greatest wrestler, but definitely got a lot better. She had a lot to offer that she wasn't allowed to offer. And when she was allowed to offer what she could, she added a lot to the shows. So I think that she's definitely an underappreciated part of those early years in Ring of Honor.
And it's sad that the reason why she's leaving here, it shows you how small a space there was for women in Ring of Honor at this time, because it was like the only way you could be like a regular or semi-regular in Ring of Honor as a woman was if you were also like a manager of somebody, like or at least an associate of someone. You know, Daisy Hayes, they kept putting her with different people. Lacey had Lacey's Angels and then later just evolved into Jimmy Jacobs. And Allison always had, for the back big portion of her ROH career, had Christopher Daniels. And it's like,
and Sarah Del Rey gets put with Sweet and Sour Inc. shortly
exactly.
After this, yeah.
And obviously there'll be other women they'll wrestle, but it'll always be like, we have like our 3 or 4 regulars that are associated with men, so we can kind of double dip on their usage and justify them. And then whenever they're in a town, we'll bring up a local wrestler there and they can wrestle a match here. But it sucks that, like, you know, they were starting to do interesting. I mean, they were starting to try and do a little bit of a tag push with her and Del Rey's the Dangerous Angels, maybe build to eventual split or something. And they don't, you know, Ring of Honor has no place apparently for like a regular woman if she isn't paired with a guy. And so they were like, well, if Daniels is gone, we have nothing for you, and we're just going to stop the tag team and everything like that. Which it's just the state of what Ring of Honor was with women at that point. But I guess that brings us to Daniels, Matt. I mean, Daniels had quite the storied career in Ring of Honor.
Yeah, I mean, before the 2004 removal of the TNA talent, Daniels was an absolute icon in Ring of Honor, and he was great during that era, almost the entire time. As far as matches, he had a lot of great matches. Obviously, the first main event of the first show on Ring of Honor history, the legendary 3-way with Danielson and Low-Ki. We've talked about that match a million times. It's phenomenal. It's, you know, still one of the best 3-ways ever. Really put Ring of Honor on the map. The 4-way match to crown a champion. Yeah, he had a really great title match against Samoa Joe. But what I think Daniels brought in those early years, besides the character work and the healing, he had really great promos, a lot. If you listen to those early shows, we talk a lot about Daniels' promos and like what those add to the DVDs. And like, especially before Punk really established himself, Daniels was the promo guy. Daniels was the one that he really anchors these shows as far as outside the ring character work. And he continued to be really good. Like, I don't remember finding Daniels' matches boring at all during those first 2 years. When he came back, the angle when he came back was very exciting. When he popped out of the crowd after Punk said he was leaving with the title and faced up to him. That was really exciting. And then I think the disappointments came pretty quickly as far as his performances. That meandering 60-minute match he had with Punk. I think he did some good stuff in 2005, honestly. He had some good matches with Joe. His match with Danielson was really good. He had a really underrated 3-way match at Joe versus Kobashi with Sydal and Azrael. But as time went on, his singles matches got just, more listless. Even though his execution was consistently fantastic, always, till the end. And his tag team run, him and Sydal were a good team, but I don't think I ever felt like even they were like a fantastic team that had these phenomenal matches, especially when you compare them to some of the other teams that came through Ring of Honor in that era. Maybe even that a little bit disappointing, but definitely better. But yeah, I just thought he was just dull in that second run. And I think we decided, at least on the last show, that it seemed like he was saving all of his creative energy for TNA. And his TNA work was better. It was much more exciting and it stood out a lot more. He just fell behind in Ring of Honor. There were people that lapped him a lot, whether it was some of the old guard like Danielson, or some of the new people that came in, like like Hero or Steen and Generico coming in, or Richards or whoever. They just overshadowed him a lot. He wasn't really able to, or shouldn't say wasn't able to, wasn't interested in keeping up with what they were doing. So it got to a point where we both, I think, agreed, like, we were not really looking forward to the Christopher Daniels matches on any of these DVDs. They were almost never the highlight. So, it's a shame that it ended like that, but he definitely continued to work hard, even though we criticized his performances creatively. He was always, he always was a hard worker in terms of his physical output. He always executed well. I still consider him a really, really good wrestler. He just was no longer doing his best work in Ring of Honor, and I don't begrudge him for that, but also for the best that he wasn't then working there anymore.
Yeah, like you saw on the last show, his physical effort never wavered, but like that mental effort, that inspiration, that seemed to put things more on autopilot at some point. For Daniels, like, I'll say, for all the grousing I've done about his singles output, like, I completely agree, pretty much everything you say, I agree with. Like, for all the grousing we've done about his singles output, not his multi-man or tag stuff on this little return run to ROH, he is still, in my opinion, like a first ballot Indie Hall of Fame wrestler and a first ballot ROH Hall of Fame guy. Like,
no doubt,
like you were saying,
no doubt about it.
Yeah, that first year of ROH, like you were saying, that was carried by Daniels, Loki, and Bryan Danielson. Like, the promotion for that first year, you go back, it was built around those three, and with good reason, because like in 2002, they were just on another level than most of the other people on that roster in terms of quality and polish. And some of those people on that roster grew up and caught up to them over time. But in that first year, it was like such a, with maybe an exception here or there for like, when AJ comes in or when Joe comes in, but like for that, a lot of that first year, it's like there's this first tier with Daniels, Loki, and Bryan, and then there's like a drop off for most other guys. And like that first three-way was such an important part. It like Danielson and Key may have been even more exciting than Daniels in that era from in-ring standpoint, but I agree with you. His ring output in that first 2 or 3 years in Ring of Honor was very good, and he was no slouch at all. And like you said, he offered something that neither Bryan or Key could offer in 2002, which is he could cut a promo. Like, is Daniels an all-time good promo guy? No, but he was a consistently good promo. And there was almost no one, like you were saying, in 2002 ROH that was other than him. And like you mentioned, we talked about, I think at the time, like we kind of really focused on rewatching every show, that like for that first year to year and a half of Ring of Honor, it felt like Daniels had a promo on almost every DVD, whether he had something to say or not, just because it was like, we're a company that wants to do promos, and there's not many guys we trust to do them. And, he did some very good promos, but it was like, he was going to get his time no matter what, because he was like the safest hand they had for cutting promos in that first era of Ring of Honor. He was also the first major heel ROH ever had. He led the first stable ROH ever had. He's one of the great glue guys of his era, in terms of being the connective tissue at all those multi-man matches, like the 4-way world title match, the 3-way in the first show, and even like that underrated 3-way you mentioned from Joe versus Kobashi, and being like just one of the safest possible hands in terms of working matches of his generation. Like, Daniels would go he'd go around as one of the major names on the U.S. Indies. You could always depend on him giving you something professional. Like, even the stuff we criticized, I don't think we've ever said like, oh, that's a Daniels match that was bad or fell apart. It was always like, that was very professional but lacking something, or professional and kind of dull. But like, he never did not give you, regardless of the opponent, something that wasn't like competent, professional, smooth to some degree, like regardless of who he's facing. And I think for a lot of great wrestlers of that generation, an early milestone in their career was getting to work a match with Daniels, like a guy whose rep was always one of the best guys on the U.S. indie scene, even the scene that predated ROH and the rise of the U.S. indies in the aughts and beyond. And because he didn't get signed by WWE, because TNA for years didn't deny him working indies on the side, he was that guy where for so many young prospects on the scene, he was the guy who was always a little or eventually a lot older than the prospects coming up, who had a lot more respect, and a lot more experience, who always got a good reaction from the fans, who was there to help you get one of your first notable matches, to really help you establish yourself, and lend you a little bit of credibility, maybe give you a little bit of advice. Is Daniels in my personal top 100 wrestlers I just like watching? No, he can be almost a little too smooth and professional, sometimes a little cold for my taste, a little rote if you've seen a lot of him. But I've said this before and I'll say it again. If I had to wrestle a match and my life depended on it being watchable, at least watchable, as someone that's never, wrestled a match and has no ability to wrestle a match, and I had to pick someone from the last 25 years to help try and carry me to one, it'd be him or Danielson. And, I think on this rewatch, I think his work in that first year of ROH doesn't just hold up. I think I appreciated it a little bit more this time. That match with Danielson at Round Robin Challenge is so fucking smart and so fucking good. Those multi-mans that I already referenced. And he was a guy that throughout his Ring of Honor tenure, fans are always super happy to see him. They always treated him like a superstar, and just an incredibly important guy to helping them get the company off the ground. So farewell to Christopher Daniels, who strangely, we talk about Matt sometimes about this show often syncs up with things that are going on a lot. It's kind of crazy that we're saying goodbye to Homicide and Daniels on this episode of all episodes that are both weeks or months removed from both those guys retiring from all of wrestling, period. How that lines up yet again.
It's the world is I don't know, things seem to happen in ways that are symmetrical, I guess.
Yeah. The Ring of Honor in this era should have booked something good happening to me so I could come back around again to me. But we get our next best time, best memories Colt Cabana highlight, which is him blowing out a party favor in Punk's face, or not blowing a party favor in Punk's face as they celebrate winning the tag titles at ROH Reborn Stage 2. And that brings us to a 4-corner survival match. Brent Albright defeated BJ Whitmer, Homicide, and Jimmy Rave in 10 minutes, 13 seconds when he pinned Whitmer after a half Nelson suplex. Technically, this is not Homicide's final match of the Gabe Sapolsky era because he actually works a double shot in late 2008. In fact, those are the last 2 ROH shows Gabe ever books. But really, as a full timer for all intents and purposes, this is the end of Homicide's run in ROH. Of course, at the time, fans did not know this was going to be his farewell. We'll talk about Homicide in a bit, but Matt, what do you think about this as a match?
It's always interesting when the ROH has a show with both the 6-man mayhem and then also the 4-corner survival. And especially when there's they were very close together, right? Only one match in between them. And actually, this match was not that different in terms of pacing. It didn't really build. It was just nonstop action. Homicide in particular, especially knowing what we know, he seemed very motivated here. He was just really working hard, going a mile a minute. So, they start out with Homicide shaking hands, telling Whitmer he trusts him unlike the others, and he says 3 years. But I was thinking 3 years since what? Because I seem to remember. I feel wasn't it 4 years since their previous big 4-way that they had at the original Death Before Dishonor, not 3, but I don't know, maybe he was just miscounting. But anyway, it just starts out fast with Raven Homicide. Albright continues the fast pace. He's stomping a mud hole, and Homicide in the corner. Normally with these Ring of Honor 4-corner survivals, they do 2 guys start out slowly, then they tag in the other 2 guys, they do the same. This is just a lot of quick tags, in and out. Well, Homicide's hitting Whitmer with the 3 Amigos. They kind of botch a head scissors. I don't know if Whitmer blocked it. It was hard to tell, but Homicide attempted the head scissors and ended up kind of pancake to the mat. In your opinion, was that a botch or a counter?
I think that was a botch, maybe.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. What do you think?
It looked messy, but I feel they could at least play it off. But I thought like it seemed like it was in a, Homicide was just non-stop motion here. Even on the apron, he bumps for Albright, giving him a cheap shot. There's a spot where Albright hits that 619 like knee thing to Jimmy Rave. And, they mentioned that's targeting Rave's jaw because he just came back from the broken jaw situation. But yeah, back in the ring, Whitmer gives Rave an exploder. Homicide hits Whitmer with a DDT. Then Albright attacks Homicide, and Rave is already back with the running knee to Albright. Like, just like one of those, like, boom, boom, boom. Whitmer buckle bombs Jimmy Rave. The Homicide immediately hits Rave with a corner knee and follows with the tope con hilos on Whitmer. Ending up in the crowd, of course, which is fitting for his last ROH match on the run, hitting the going into the crowd tope con hilo. There's a spot where Albright swings Homicide into the guardrail in the powerbomb position. There's a spot where Albright goes for a superplex on Whitmer, and Whitmer knocks Albright into the tree of woe, and then Homicide pops up, hits a cutter on Whitmer. Then Rave comes and grabs a sudden heel hook. Then Albright grabs Rave in the crowbar, and then Whitmer breaks that whole thing up. So, you could tell what I'm doing here. Like, I'm just describing a bunch of moves because that's what the match was. It was just move, 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 move. We end up with Whitmer doing a bunch of strike exchanges with Homicide. Then Homicide boots Whitmer, blocks a suplex by Albright, sends Whitmer headfirst into Albright, but then Whitmer goes for an exploder on Homicide. And then Whitmer actually goes for a cop kill on Homicide, but Homicide avoids it. Then Whitmer goes for a suplex combo. Whitmer powerbombs Homicide. Then Albright comes from behind with a half Nelson suplex on Whitmer and gets the pin on that. So, and the reason I described it like that is because, again, that's what the match was. It was just moves, moves, moves. I say they almost seemed like they were trying to go for that, Death Before Dishonor four-way style. It wasn't quite as good as that, but I do think that they lost the crowd a little bit at certain points because they didn't really build the match. But I thought it was very entertaining. I was impressed by how fast they were going, especially with a few guys that really hadn't done that fast pace recently. And while there was a little bit of redundancy to the opener, I do think the moves were a little bit more impactful here. And because they were bigger stars, I think it felt more important. So, yeah, I feel like I appreciated what they did here. I enjoyed it. Again, not spectacularly great, but I thought this was a nice change of pace from some of the recent four-ways we've seen.
I like this match, too. I've seen enough meaningless random ROH four-ways to last me a lifetime, but I will say in this match's credit, I always say that often the best approach to these is just to go balls to the wall and don't overstay your welcome. And I feel like that's exactly what they did here. These guys, I'm glad you really saw the same thing I did, which I guess is a fairly obvious thing, but sometimes I wonder if I'm crazy. But that these guys went at a shocking pace, especially for a match with like you were saying, two guys that aren't known for this. Albright and Rave aren't really known for, that isn't their bag. Not that Rave isn't capable of it, but the go real fast match or a multi-man at that. And they all keep a real fast pace from the start to the end. It's as if someone told these guys they only had 4 minutes to cram everything in, but they actually had 10 minutes and they just decide, well, let's just keep the pace anyway. This is still Jimmy Rave's first weekend back from coming back early from his broken jaw. And while the fans do pop pretty big when his entrance music hits, they also later chant Jimmy likes balls. So we were wondering on the last show, is he going to get another 100% hugely enthusiastic, shockingly hugely enthusiastic babyface reaction? And that isn't the case here. He does get some fans that cheer when his music starts, but some fans still razzing him. But to be fair, Jimmy also isn't playing face here, right? He's avoiding fans when they want him to slap their hands on the entrance. When fans throw streamers at him, he's not appreciating it. So, but yeah, like you were saying, as a match, this is all pace. This is all hard work. There isn't any real story or emotional stakes except Homicide and Albright maybe being slightly extra feisty against each other because they're in a feud. There isn't anything in this match you haven't seen these guys do a million times before, except maybe Homicide breaking out the super chin breaker off the second turnbuckle on Rave to work over his jaw, which is always cool when he breaks out something like that. But it's just a ton of effort. They're playing their hits, but at a very high speed, never letting up. I preferred the six-way that opened the show because just we hadn't seen the Chikara guys really at all in ROH. So there was more novelty to that and just this natural energy there of people trying to make a name in a new promotion versus 4 established guys here that are just having another night at the office in a relatively meaningless and random 4-way. And I agree with you. It's a little bit of weird booking to book a Spot Fest 6-way and then a Spot Fest 4-way 2 matches apart. That is definitely like a little bit of like little devoid of ideas or just trying to squeeze all these guys on the card.
Feels like something you might see AEW do, though, to be honest.
Yeah. But in a sense, I almost feel like that does a little bit of disservice to this match, but I would still say this is like above average on the border of good, like a super strong above average on the border of good, enjoyable spot fest. And there is that one notable spot, which is, poor Jimmy Rave on his first weekend back on after a broken jaw. He gets buckle bombed by Whitmer. And if you slow-mo it, you can see after Whitmer tosses Jimmy into the corner, Whitmer, for some reason, decides to keep moving forward, like head first, towards Jimmy. And then Jimmy bounces off the buckles, taking the bump, and they knock heads. It happens super quick, and they're both immediately reacting to it afterwards. And Whitmer ends up getting a little trickle of blood from the top of his forehead. And poor Jimmy's eye gets fucked up and starts to swell up badly. And apparently it was really bad because we'll go to the newsletters. Dave Meltzer wrote in the Observer at the time, BJ Whitmer headbutted Rave accidentally, and he wound up with his eye swelled shut. This is Rave, not Whitmer, and had to go to the emergency room after the match. And then Mike Johnson at PW Insider wrote, Rave received 4 stitches and his eye is currently swollen shut. One person who saw him after he had returned from the emergency room described Rave as, quote, looking like a scene out of a Rocky film, unquote. So some guys just can't catch a break. But I guess that brings us to Homicide, because even though he does come back in late 2008, we might as well. This is really the end for him for his run, the run people remember. So I feel like this is a good way to talk, because I remember a while ago we were talking privately. You were like, should we talk about Homicide on the next show when he announced his retirement from wrestling? I felt like we could put it off because I knew this show was coming up. It would give us our chance to talk about and kind of celebrate him here. So I'll say, when I think about Homicide's career, it's always a little bittersweet for me, because to me, he is the answer to the question, who was the most over guy, the biggest name, possibly even the most talented guy from this promotion in this era who didn't get a really big run somewhere else? And to be fair, like, someone always has to be that answer to the answer to that question. Like, whenever you draw a line somewhere, someone's going to be the first person that's right at the edge of the line that doesn't cross it. But you look at, like, who are the biggest names of the first 5 or 6 years of ROH? Who are bigger than or as important as Homicide? And you would say, well, okay, Punk and Danielson. Well, they became generational worldwide superstars and multimillionaires. Samoa Joe didn't quite get that big, but he ended up working everywhere and getting at least a decent push everywhere he went.
And still going strong and adding to his legacy.
Exactly. And AJ Styles and Christopher Daniels both were pushed harder and for longer in TNA than Homicide. Styles went on to have even bigger success in New Japan and WWE. And you look at Homicide, and in these 5 years for ROH, he was often on their level in terms of push, in terms of his contribution to the company, in terms of how over he was among the fans. And he held his own against all of them when they worked together in matches, and clearly also had their respect in large amounts. And it's just, there is a bit of sadness that most of those guys became nationally known at least millionaires, and he didn't. But that also, I don't want to be too down, because I don't want to say, that's not to say Homicide had a poor career. Like, he wrestled for over 30 years, was hugely respected, like I just said, by a ton of his peers. He did have a run in a national televised promotion in TNA, where maybe some people will forget this. I almost kind of forgot this till I really just went back and thought about it. For a time, LAX in TNA was like a legitimately hot act. Like, I believe it won Best Gimmick and Best Tag Team in all of wrestling in the 2006 Observer Awards among the voters.
You could say they were the hottest act in the company, I would say, on a couple of different occasions. Both back then in 2006, and then there was sort of a renaissance run back in 2008 when they ended up going against Santana and Ortiz, right? Like, there was, and I think both of those periods, they were in some ways the most notable thing about the company both times.
Yeah, and I don't know if I would go his creative peak, because I love like 2003 Homicide, which I'll get into in a minute. But like, when we think about his just peak of popularity where he was closest to maybe to getting some real wider recognition. I think looking back, we have to say 2006 was his year because between LAX being so hot in that first year of its existence in TNA, and at the same time, he's in ROH where he is like the central figure in much of that year, which we talk about how the last quarter of that year of 2006, for as great of a rest of the year of it was not good. The end of the Carino feud and Homicide was disappointing. The Cornette Homicide feud was quite a bit of it was dog shit, I think we can safely say looking back on it.
Yeah.
But we can also say some of the best moments of that year were Homicide in ROH. Like he was the best moments of the CZW feud. That the Necro Butcher match was great. You know, his appearance in Cage of Death was so awesome. You know, I think his win against Danielson at Final Battle was one of the most emotionally satisfying, like feel good moments the promotion has ever had. And so it is saying something too, where even where it had some of his low points, in 2006, not only is he doing the amazing, the really over stuff with LAX and TNA, he's also having some of the best moments of what a lot of people would say was one of ROH's best creative years in its history. He's kind of like the central figure at some points. So I would say like Daniels, I'd be voting for Homicide in any ROH Hall of Fame, any US Indie Wrestling Hall of Fame worth their salt. Easy yes for me on both of those counts. It's going to be weird to review ROH without Homicide because he was in the promotion since day one, and he was a constant and a fixture here in a way that like almost no one else has been, because other guys came along at least a little bit later. And even day one guys like Daniels and Danielson had like sabbaticals for different reasons. And Homicide was just always consistently there, usually figured to something somewhat significant. And when I think about why Homicide didn't get the careers a lot of these other guys did, I think of something I think I mentioned in the early days of the podcast, where I think it's a quote from Jason Powell of the Torch wrote, where he wrote Homicide off as a New Jack copycat. And I think some people did. Unfortunately, I think some people, they first started noticing Homicide in the first couple of years after ECW folded. And with that context, they looked at a person of color, sometimes wearing a bandana, with a persona emphasizing their street cred and their street toughness, wrestling sometimes in plunder matches. And they just immediately thought to themselves, oh, he's another New Jack. And nothing could have been further than the truth. Whatever's good and bad about New Jack, Homicide is like a completely different skill set in the ring. Like, Homicide is one of the most well-rounded, versatile wrestlers of his era. I always go back to that 2003 ROH run where you and I both voted him as our yearly awards as the best wrestler in the company for that year. Like, you go back and watch that year. He could have an epic modern indie world title main event like he did against Samoa Joe at Do or Die. He could have those wild, chaotic kitchen sink matches with Trent Acid. He could have a brutal, gritty, almost throwback blood feud, brawling wars like he did with Steve Carino, Bitter Friends, Different Enemies. Or he could have the big bloody death match like he did against Carino at a War of the Wire. Like, and on top of all that, if you want to throw him in a random four-way spot fest, as we saw it on this show, he'd fit in there. Like, if you want him to go 20 minutes with Danielson in a straight-up wrestling match, he would not look lost with Danielson on the mat. Like, and more than most, which is saying something, because ROH was a promotion with this incredibly high general work ethic. Homicide felt like a guy who was taking very few days off, always trying to give you his best, regardless of his place on the card. And I think one of the other things that hurt Homicide was that he was a small guy with a tough guy persona. And I think big national promotions of that era had even more of a size bias than they do now. And when they did use those smaller guys, they had very specific tailored spots for them. And it's sort of the way we're talking about how ROH in these early years, had very narrow roles they would consider to use women for at all. Like, Homicide wasn't a pretty boy who'd get a lot of sympathy getting a beat down a ton. That's not what he was made for. He could fly. Like, he has one of the best tope con helos I've ever seen in my life, but he wasn't the prototypical X Division Spot Fest junior, even though he could work in those kinds of matches. And he couldn't cut a promo like a CM Punk could. Like, Homicide was a guy we've talked about with real charisma, and his promos could be strangely effective in that they definitely gave you the flavor of Homicide and felt like promos only he could cut, but they were almost always lacking in substance. They weren't exactly eloquent or really told stories. Like, to really get the most out of Homicide, you had to push him in a way where he had a real sense of menace, like he could really hurt anyone he was in the ring with. And I think WWE and TNA, those promotions had serious problems pushing any guy the size of Homicide that way. You know, if you were a small guy, they want you to be either the stereotypical underdog, the sympathetic pretty boy, or the state-of-the-art Daredevil Jr. And as versatile as Homicide was, the sad thing is he did not fit neatly into any of those three boxes, which is what smaller guys were those were the roles for them. So, you know, I could say a little bit more about him, but I'll throw it to you, Matt. Like, again, I don't want this to be a complete downer because, again, I think he had a really wonderful career, and I think he's appreciated by some people. It's more of a matter, I feel like, he's the guy here I wish he was appreciated more. Like I was making the analogy, if I was going to make the analogy, if Ring of Honor of this era of the first 5 years was a sports team, imagine they were like a great college sports team and they won a lot of college championships and they had like 7 or 8 players that were all like star level college players. And like 7 of them all got drafted to major league teams and became stars there. And then the one guy, for some reason, he doesn't get drafted. Even though when they were in college, they all felt like they were at the similar level. And I feel a little bit bad for Homicide. That's what makes it bittersweet to me.
Yeah, and also, you know, some of the health issues and like that shoulder injury that he nagged him for years and years and years that he, you know, struggled to get fixed. And, you know, there were different points where, you know, we heard stuff about, you know, him needing kind of like help, you know, money to help fix some certain injuries and stuff, right? Like he never was really able to get the get the financial rewards, never mind the stardom that some of these other guys got. And, you know, that's a struggle when you work as hard as Homicide and put your body on the line as much as he did. But, you know, you certainly hit a lot of the big points, but, you know, I'll just add a little bit more about the ROH run. For one thing, he added something tonally to ROH that I think wouldn't have been there. The out of control element, you know, he brought in, you know, a kind of like the New York crew. Obviously, he was associated with Low Key also, but like, you know, Julius Smokes coming in, you know, that was it added a dynamic element to Ring of Honor that wouldn't have been there otherwise. And yeah, like you said, there was this attitude that he was a New Jack clone when we know that so many of his highlight matches in those early years were not brawling matches at all, right? Like the match with, I think the first match that he had that I can recall that really stood out as, you know, like, oh, this is like a really big time, major, memorable match was the Do or Die match against Samoa Joe, which is, you know, one of my favorite matches of that year. I think the best match those two had against each other, and just, you know, spectacular. And that wasn't a brawling match. It was a fast-paced, hard-hitting Impact wrestling match. You know, it wasn't like a technical match either, but it wasn't a plunder brawl. And then when he did start doing the plunder stuff, you know, and again, 2003 was just, you know, I think, you know, he was the standout in the ring for sure. You know, he had 2 matches against Trent Acid that were just, you know, out of control, wild. And then that 4-way we were just talking about, the one at Death Before Dishonor, where I think he was probably the star of that match. And obviously, Steve Corino at Bitter Friends, Stiffer Enemies, just to this day, one of the best brawls, in my opinion, of the entire decade of the 2000s. And I think we both put it as our match of the year for that year.
Yeah.
War of the Wire, which is a different kind of vibe, and you know, there were other good barbed wire matches. I know we just got done in the wrestling community, you know, mourning the loss of Sabu and talking about some of his barbed wire matches. But that match with Carino had an intensity that a lot of matches you don't see, and that, you know, it had a weirdly quiet crowd that we complained about in that whole episode, but there was still like this incredible, intense, violent vibe to that feud. There was something that felt real about the way those two guys hated each other, and again, added something to ROH that wouldn't have otherwise been there. Then in 2004, he kind of does lean into that wild side. He turns heel, becomes kind of crazy in terms of persona. I think they maybe go over the top with it. Like, remember, if anybody remembers the Generation Next DVD ending with Gabe Sapolsky screaming, "Evacuate, evacuate," because Homicide was like running around throwing chairs, and they was acting like he was going to take down the tent. Like, it was, I mean, you know, but
at the same time, you kind of appreciate that they were trying to make Homicide seem special and different. And he was having great matches that year, too.
And to what you said earlier, if there was going to be one character Ring of Honor had access to that, like, you could even suggest could be that kind of threatening, it was Homicide. Like, a lot of guys they couldn't even attempt that kind of thing with. Hello?
Oh, sorry, I was muted. He had the aura that he needed to have in terms of just being able to project that, even without saying anything. But then you mentioned his promos, and yeah, his promos could go from wacky, incoherent, and just kind of funny. Like, if you remember, we talked a lot about the promo where he mentioned that he doesn't know if he's going to come back to Ring of Honor, but then maybe he'll come back in a year, but then maybe he'll come back, and now he's definitely coming back very soon. Like, all in the span of 90 seconds. But then also, if you'd see some of his live promos when he was a heel, he would even just the amount that he would curse in his promos. Like, he just seemed genuinely mad and dangerous at certain points when he wanted to be like that, and maybe sometimes even when he didn't want to be like that and he just was angry. I remember promos as a babyface where he would just start talking shit about the crowd and getting angry and stuff. So there was an element to Homicide where you're just oh, how much of this is a work, you know? So, and none of the other guys had that. Certainly you're not going to get that from a Bryan Danielson, or even a CM Punk who was obviously testy, but more in a this guy's testy kind of way, as opposed to a this guy is scary kind of way. I guess the only other person that you could really say could project scary if you wanted to was Samoa Joe, right? But different. He never was really presented as a heel that would be out of control like that. He was more just don't fuck with him or he will ruin you. Yeah, I mean, you said basically everything that I could say about 2006. He was, in terms of storylines, the star of that year. It wasn't his best year in the ring, but he was still able to have some really great matches. Like you mentioned the title switch against Danielson, and I told you I liked the match that he had against Danielson where he didn't win the title even better. That was a great match. The Necro, and the Cage of Death, both fantastic. So he was, and even the Cabana feud, right? We didn't talk about that, but that was one of the most memorable parts of the early part of 2006. So by 2007, I think, we both agreed, similar to Daniels, he was getting stale. He just seemed like he was of a different time. The TNA stuff was definitely superseding the ROH stuff for, understandable reasons. You were talking about why he didn't really get pushed outside. I feel like part of it is, like you said, him presenting as tough, but also, like I said, dangerous and scary. I don't think that it was possible in TNA to present a wrestler that way, at least not in that era. When everything was at the Impact Zone, just the brightness, the tone of the crowd, the way, the Don West of it all, who's great. I love Don West, but it was impossible to project serious, super intense, dangerous wrestling in that environment. Do you know what I mean?
It's too sterile an environment.
Too sterile, too silly almost. And not that they didn't have violent, dangerous matches, but even then there was an element of this is fun. TNA was projecting fun, and there was a place for that, but it probably wasn't a place for Homicide to do all he could. So the fact that he was able to get over in LAX and present as seriously as he could, partially thanks to Conan and stuff, I think he kind of overachieved what I would have expected there. But yeah, it's a shame that just the mainstream of wrestling wasn't suitable for what he had to offer back then. I think decent chance he would have done pretty well in AEW had that existed at the time, but we'll never know. I'm glad that we got to have the run that we had. He is absolutely first ballot ROH Hall of Famer. I mean, I don't know if I certainly couldn't think of 10 guys that I would say are bigger deals to ROH than him. I'm trying to think if I could think of like 5. When people talk about the Mount Rushmore of ROH, I think a lot of people do consider Homicide for that. I'm not sure if I would put him up there, but I'd certainly consider it. He's pretty close to that level, if not all the way there.
If there was Mount Rushmore more, a second mountain of 4 more heads, then it's a lot easier to say yes to him.
Yeah,
he should probably be on that mountain at least.
Yeah, at least.
But something you said that made me think for a sec was you were talking about like how Homicide kind of made you feel like he was real sometimes in the way he always acted. I was thinking, I don't know if there's ever been a wrestler that was more versatile bell to bell, that was more rigid as a character. Like Homicide, his whole career has basically been Homicide. Like even when the difference between Homicide as a heel and Homicide as a face is like he just twists the knob a tiny notch, like I feel like he only knows how to cut promos, how to be himself, how to act one way as a character. But yet as in the ring, he's so versatile. It's a very interesting kind of like contrast.
Yeah, I mean, there is like the face version and the heel version, which are a little bit different, but I know what you mean. Yeah, he can do it all in the ring. Like really, he can do anything you want in the ring. He can do every style, brawling, technical. I mean, I didn't even mention like some of the technical matches he had, like with Danielson and stuff, where he's just like doing like limb work and stuff like that. Like he does the high impact, the fast pace, the spot fest, the brawling. He was really good at all of it. And it wasn't always the smoothest with him, but that, I think, in some cases enhanced it.
Yeah, and I feel like Samoa Joe I've talked about where he kind of had in the early times with him coming in the same era as Homicide, some of the problems that Homicide had where I think some people in that era looked at an overweight Samoan guy named just Samoa Joe, which when you first hear it sounds like kind of a goofy name, and immediately wrote that guy off, especially when in an era where there was such a kind of a swinging of the pendulum back in the other direction where people who had spent years put with like Crash TV and Russo and all that stuff and oversized guys and steroid freaks getting pushed down their throats were like, all I want to see is 5'8" jacked white technical wrestlers. And like, there was a bias against sometimes like people's knee-jerk reaction was like, oh, a guy named Samoa Joe who looks like that can't be good, even though that's ignoring a lot of wrestling history. But the thing I would say about Samoa Joe is I think if you watch most of his matches of that prime era, if you just watch one of those matches, you instantly get it. You go, oh, this is who he is. This is why he's special. With Homicide, he has a lot of great matches, but I think to truly appreciate him, it is like that breadth and that depth and that consistency where it's like, I don't know if I could just show you one Homicide match, even some of his best stuff, and feel like you've completely gotten it and you're completely won over and you completely get what makes him so great. I feel like I'd have to do like, here's a 2003 comp of Homicide ROH matches. And once you see like 5 great matches that are all different against different opponents and how consistent he is, you'd start to be like, oh, now I get where a guy like Joe, it really is, or a guy like early Rey Mysterio or something. It's like there are certain wrestlers where you can get it just by watching them for 10 minutes.
For sure. Don't have anything to add to that. You're absolutely right.
Yeah. So, and on top of all that, he helped train Low-Ki. So, like we talk about his legacy, like that's a hell of a footnote. One of the guys who arguably is even better than him in some ways or on his level, he can take some credit for that too. So, kudos to Homicide and a fantastic career among those who know. Our next Colt Cabana memory is his cage match with Austin Aries for the ROH World Title in 2005. And then when we next joined the Briscoes backstage, Jay says Alex Shelley and Chris Sabin are yellow bastards for jumping him in Detroit after Mark was knocked out. They're going to find out who the best tag team in the business is tonight. Man up, fellas, man up. So incredibly basic promo here just to remind us they're alive. And that brings us to Austin Aries defeated Rocky Romero via pinfall in 12 minutes, 28 seconds after hitting the 450. This is Aries' chance to get revenge on Romero for pinning him at that recent 3-on-3 elimination match. And it's a chance for the beleaguered, I guess you'd say, resilience to get a win against No Remorse Corps in this feud. It's also Aries' last match at ROH for about 3 months, which thankfully isn't enough to justify me saying we should talk about his ROH career. So we can avoid that. He will be back relatively soon. To me, this was like a textbook good 3-star-ish, give or take a quarter star mid-card match. It's another match on this night where I thought like a lot on this first half of this card especially, but on this whole show, they work at a good fast pace. There's a little jump in a lot of guys' steps tonight. And Aries at times still fairly big for Romero. At some moments he's acting like he's really beat to shit by him leading into it. Sometimes maybe it's more normal indie wrestling selling, but they're starting to really lean into Rocky's kicks at this point in his ROH run with the amount he's throwing and with commentary playing up the idea that he knocked Jack Evans out with one the night before. One thing I realized with this watching this match was if you throw so many kicks, there are so many points of failure. Like if you whiff on it, if the camera catches it from a bad angle and exposes that whiff, if the wrestlers and announcers then act like the kick hit where it intended rather than them saying it hit somewhere where it actually landed, or if it completely missed, them acknowledging it didn't miss at all, and then the wrestler not selling it all. But then when I thought that, I thought, well, actually that's not points of failure. That's almost like only one of those needs to go right to cover for a blown kick. So actually, you just need one of those things to cover for it. And, all that's to say there's some really good kicks in this match. There's a couple not so great kicks in this match. There's also a point where Aries seemingly kicked Rocky right in the fucking face. It looked brutal, but I guess he was fine. It felt like Rocky got his receipt later when he gave Aries a hard kick to the head a little bit later. This is a match I'd say where it's kind of generic, not in a boring way, but it's one of the reasons why I described it as a good mid-card match in the sense that it's entertaining enough. It's a good enough effort, but there's not a lot to me that really sticks out as memorable or extra beyond what you normally see. Like, I don't know. It's hard for me to find a lot else to say about this, but so overall, I would say this is like a good match, maybe in some ways technically better than some of the matches on the show, but in some ways it's one of the least interesting matches as from a podcast standpoint, Matt, because there's just not much I can find to say. But what do you have something to say? What do you have to say about this match? Save me.
Oh, this match tells a tale. No, I'm just kidding. But no, I would say what I could say about it is it shows, like, I think an advancement of what ROH shows were expecting people to do in the undercard. By 2007, we complained a lot in 2005 and in 2006 to some extent about the dull-paced matches that you'd get on these ROH undercards from wrestlers who were great. Samoa Joe matches sometimes even Austin Aries matches. And here they're showing up and they're working fast and they're working hard and they're trying to be entertaining. And yes, they're not trying to steal the show, but they're finding a middle ground between not trying to steal the show and also not being boring. And I've been a big 2007 defender for a long time when people have kind of talked about that being the beginning of the decline of ROH. And it's for reasons like this. Up and down the card, the shows are just better in the ring. This is, maybe one of the lesser matches on the show, but still, fast-paced, intense, good kicks, good character working from Romero, kind of continuing to work on expressing his heel persona more. Aries is always reliable. I think that they did a good job here highlighting Romero's kicks and also making it seem like Aries escaped by the skin of his teeth. By the end, he put in the ankle lock. He was, he got hit with that Diablo armbar off the top rope, which got a really good pop. He, after Aries does the Finley roll, he kind of sells for a bit, doesn't immediately capitalize, and he just barely gets, ducks a kick, rolls up, hits the punt, gets the brain buster, gets the 450, just barely wins. But so it kind of helps Romero in that sense. So I thought it was a good match. It was entertaining. I thought it did a good job with making Romero seem like a threat to a former world champion. It wasn't great, wasn't memorable, but I appreciated what it said about what ROH was doing at this point.
Yeah, I agree. The only other note I have on this match, and I don't even know why I included this, but it's from Doug Wellox, who wrote in a PW Torch Live report. He wrote, some little girl around the age of 12 or so was giving Rocky a ton of crap at ringside, and he called her a bitch, which I thought was funny.
There was one point. There was one point in the match where the crowd was chanting "chicken legs," so she must have called him that. That's got to be what happened.
Yeah. So, After the match, Roderick Strong runs in and he attacks Aries, and Delirious immediately comes out and chases him through the crowd. I know the Roddy Delirious feud started with Delirious suffering a legitimate concussion in the match between the two, but since then, Matt, it feels like this feud has seemingly been 100% comprised of Delirious chasing Roderick through crowds. Like, it is maybe the most thin story. Like, we talked about how Jimmy Jacobs has, point A to point E. I mentioned that earlier in his storylines. This is point half A over and over again. It's just Delirious chases Roderick Strong places.
Yeah, you'd think logically, like, the promoters of ROH would get them in the ring against each other sooner instead of continuing just to let this happen.
So our next Colt Cabana ROH memory airs, this one being a clip of his Soccer Riot match with Nigel McGuinness. And then that brings us to the ROH World Title match. Takeshi Morishima successfully defends the title when he defeats Shingo via pinfall in 15 minutes, 25 seconds after he hit a backdrop driver. This is Shingo's last match in ROH as part of this little almost 11-month excursion here. He actually does work ROH a few more times in this era when they go to Japan this year and next, and he comes back for 2008 WrestleMania weekend shows in the US, but as a regular, this is it for him. The announcers frame it as Shingo said before the match, apparently, that if he didn't win the ROH World title tonight, he's going to go home to Japan. This is also the weird example of one of those things that happens in wrestling occasionally. This is a Dragon Gate wrestler wrestling a Noah wrestler for the ROH title in ROH, which is like a weird little bit of trivia. But Matt, what'd you think about this as a little swan song here for Shingo?
Oh man, did I like this. This is exactly what the doctor ordered for me, as far as just, I mean, I remember, so I read in The Observer, in the review of this match, they said the crowd wasn't into it at first, but they really got them by the end. Did you perceive that the crowd was not into this at first?
No, and I love that you have a bone to pick with it, because when it's my turn, I have a different bone to pick with Dave at The Observer about this match. So we're teaming up on him, Matt. Tag teaming.
Yeah.
He's the man in peril.
Like, the crowd was into it right away because they just got moving right away, you know? There was a Shingo trying to charge and knock Morishima down, but Morishima knocks him down. So then Shingo tries again, and this time gets him down, and then dives onto him. And, there's a part where Shingo has to chop Morishima with two hands to be effective, which I really liked. The first few minutes were just Shingo with a continuous flurry of offense, doesn't let up. Once Morishima finally does take over, he does like an ole style hip attack on the floor with Shingo sitting in a chair, and then he slows it down. And I have noticed this on both this show and the match he had against Aries the previous night, which is when Shingo slows it down, when Morishima slows it down, he really does do the WWE slow it down, and when you feel you're going too slow, slow it down some more. He just walks around. He just really literally points where he just walks around. I'm honestly surprised that WWE, it really is the looks just that big of a deal that WWE didn't take a shine to him, because he really did follow that advice of just slowing it down when he was in control. But that doesn't really last very long. When Shingo starts striking back, they have a mid-ring forearm battle. And they, take a few big shots for Morishima to knock Shingo down. Shingo gets a lot of offense against Morishima. Maybe more than almost anybody except maybe Samoa Joe. I'd say he has a higher percent of offense than Nigel did in that match against each other. There's a part where Morishima suplexes Shingo, so Shingo bangs the mat to power back up and catches Morishima with an inverted atomic drop as Morishima came off the ropes. There's another spot where Shingo goes for a vertical suplex and struggles, but he powers him up. And what I really liked about that spot is by showing the struggle that Shingo had to get him up for that suplex, the crowd popped really big and started a "Let's Go Shingo" chant. Whereas if he had just suplexed him, I don't think it would have gotten that reaction. You know what I mean? Showing that it took effort. Just those little things make such a big difference. There's a spot where Morishima tries the backdrop driver on the apron, so Shingo DDTs him on the apron, and then he just picks Morishima up and fucking Death Valley drivers him on the floor, crazy. Shingo, like I'm like watching this match. I'm like, where has this guy been in the entire run that he had in ROH? Right? Like, but back in the ring, he's hitting Morishima's own backdrop driver, which gets another good near fall. Morishima, he fights Shingo off and like just palm strikes his chest and just like clubs him and shoves Sinclair out of the way and continues to clubber on him. There's a spot where Morishima goes up top, but Shingo pops up multiple times and headbutts him, and then Shingo hits a superplex, and Morishima, just like in the match against, I think it was Nigel, Morishima just pops right back up. So Shingo lariats him and hits last falconry for a near fall that like the crowd totally bought. Like they were like buying that near fall, which was amazing. And then he hits a lariat for another great near fall, and the crowd's just going berserk at this point. Hits a lariat to the back of Morishima, then to the front, but Morishima lariats him down, cuts him off, hits the Uranagi, but Shingo pops up, so Morishima lariats him, and Shingo kicks out. Then Shingo blocks a power bomb and turns a backdrop driver into a crossbody. Then Shingo goes for a power bomb, but Morishima backdrops out and drops onto his chest. And then Morishima hits another lariat, gets a 2 count, and then hits the backdrop driver and gets the win. Other than that, like, little moment where Morishima was just walking around pulling up his trunks, like, this was just nonstop, awesome offense, just bomb throwing, sprint, but, like, not too short either. Like, the crowd was molten by the end. I think this was Morishima's best match so far. I think it was better than the match against Samoa Joe, better than the match against Nigel, better than the match against Aries. Best match in ROH, I mean, obviously. I thought this was just a blast, and I think this actually set a template for future Morishima title defenses, where it does get hotter and heavier, and it's all built around these giant near falls at the end. And I think that's a formula that works for him. You can clearly see Shingo well on his way to being one of the best in the world here, if he wasn't already. I feel like ROH should have just felt really lucky they were able to have this match on one of their DVDs. Because I feel like if this match took place on a Noah show that Meltzer reviewed, this would have gotten a lot of praise in The Observer. I don't know if Meltzer ever actually watched it, but just fantastic.
Yeah, so I guess my bone to pick isn't about from what Meltzer said, isn't from this match, but technically the last show, because on the last episode, I read a quote from Dave in The Observer where he reported that Morishima on this weekend seemed to be getting over more, but he seemingly credited it to Morishima not being so dominant and selling more. And on the last show, I read that quote, I was like, well, in this match on Aries he wrestles that night, I would completely disagree, because I thought that was like the most dominant he'd looked so far in his entire Ring of Honor run so far. And by the way, I felt like that was really to his benefit, and I really liked that match. But then the interesting thing is, now one night later, I rewatched this match and I go, okay, well, this is what Dave is talking about, because in some ways, 24 hours after a match where Morishima was as dominant as he's been so far in ROH in some respects, he wrestles this match for, like you said, I agree with you, he's manhandled and on defense more than any ROH match he's had so far, with, like you were saying, maybe the possible exception of Joe. I'm not sure, but Morishima just gives Shingo a ton here. And even though I really like the Aries match going in the opposite direction, I think this match works great too, going in this direction. Shingo's like this textbook power junior, and Morishima is a very agile super heavyweight. So even just on paper, that's like a really interesting dynamic. And Shingo on this ROH run, I by no means have never felt like he was ever mailing it in or doing anything but work hard. But on this night, it definitely felt like he's got a bit of an extra spark. Like he, on paper, this feels like one of the biggest matches of a very young at this point career for him. It's the end of his excursion. He's wrestling for the world singles title of this promotion he's been in for almost a year. He's wrestling a big up and comer from a rival promotion in Japan, and he's wrestling it like he thinks it's one of the biggest matches he's had so far. He's just clearly going for it. He's doing stuff he hasn't done often, ROH, like that big dive to the floor, because he's not flying much at this point. And he just has his usual energy plus like an extra 15%. And I also thought getting to wrestle someone the size and character of Morishima also let Shingo show off some of his almost goofy, over-the-top selling that we've seen just glimpses of in ROH, and I really liked, actually, that kind of selling. We get a couple instances of it in this match, and I really enjoyed it. But we don't see a lot of it because, yeah, Shingo gets a ton in this match. Morishima certainly gets his stuff in, and he does get that section you mentioned in the middle of the match where it's very similar to the Aries one, the one before, where he, like you were saying, he full on Randy Orton's it. At one point he just literally stops and asks the ref to to do a 10 count so that, so Shingo loses by knockout. You can tell the ref's like, oh, we don't usually do that. Oh, I guess, okay, we can do that. And I'll count to 10. And, he just really slows it down and dominates. But then it picks right back up again, like you said. And that ole style hip attack to a seated opponent against the guardrail, I think that might be, with the possible exception of some of Tony Storm's running hip attacks in the corner, like the most brutal, legitimately like impactful, scary looking ass attack in pro wrestling history. Like it's so solid. It looks like you could, knock a guy out with your ass on that. But, there's a lot to like in this match, and I was really glad you brought up, because I wrote about a bunch of my notes too, about loving so much that simple spot where Shingo built to suplexing Morishima, because a few shows ago we saw that tag team, I think on that tag team match on This Means War 2, where Doug Williams gut wrench suplexed Morishima out of nowhere. And I complained a little bit, I think, on that show, because I was like, that's a really cool spot. But to me, something just felt odd about someone randomly throwing Morishima around like that with no build up or fanfare. And here, Shingo just does a regular vertical suplex, and he builds to it, like you said, so well. Like, he tries to do it, he can't, then he does a few other moves, then he really sells to the crowd that he's going to try and do it again, and really primes the crowd for it, and then he hits it, and the crowd goes nuts for a fucking vertical suplex. And it's so simple. Like, this wasn't a story they teased 10 times throughout the entire length of the match. This is something they literally teased and built to twice in, I would say, a 60 to 90 second period of the match, and yet that much work was enough to get so much more out of a vertical suplex and make it seem like a monumental accomplishment that Shingo could do it. And it's one of those things where it's like, it makes me feel like a crusty old wrestling reviewer, but like, it takes so little work sometimes to get more out of stuff like that. Like, he didn't have to do that much. And it feels like they just got so much more. And it gets way more of a reaction than that Doug Williams gut wrench out of nowhere on Morishima, which is a cooler spot on paper. Like, just from the mechanics of it, that's a cooler spot. But he didn't build to it, and it gets less than this does. Now, Shingo does do big power moves on Morishima after that with no real build-up and no real problem. Like you said, the Death Valley driver on the floor, the superplex, the last falconry. But because they all came after the vertical suplex that he did build up, I was able to kind of tell myself in kayfabe wrestling logic, hey, maybe once he got over that first physical hurdle, the rest were easier. He had more confidence. Morishima was a little more hurt. So it was like you got the best of both worlds. You got one spot that was really built to around tossing Morishima that felt earned. And then you got the crazy out of nowhere, holy shit, he just hurt this guy up and I didn't expect it moves. And like you said, the fact that on that last falconry near fall, they got the crowd to think that Shingo was going to win the ROH world title on this night. Like, what an accomplishment. That alone is kind of like the review of the match. Like, the fact that they were able to convince this crowd. And I still really think the way I'd love to see Morishima most in ROH is finding that balance where he's dominant, but can be hurt, like I talked about in the last episode. Like, in video game terms, I would want Morishima to be the boss, where it's not hard as for you as the player to land attacks on him, but his health bar is 5 times as long as yours, and whenever he hits your character, you lose a quarter of your health bar. Like, sometimes in ROH he has that vibe. I wish it was a little more consistent, and there are even moments like that in this match where Shingo's landing a bunch of stuff on Morishima, and it just takes one move from Morishima to retake control. Like, one of my favorite moments in this match is when, like, Shingo just charges at Morishima, and Morishima just throws this, like, open-handed strike at him, like, not precise. It's just like a big fucking bear paw coming down on him. And that alone stops Shingo. And I just love that stuff, and I wish we saw even more of it up to this point. And I really love also that Morishima won with just one backdrop driver here, because in some matches he's been needing a few. And I feel like he's kind of already in that mold where every match he feels like he needs to hit all of his stuff. And I think it'd be a bit cooler if he didn't always have to. I think it'd be a case, I want it to be a case of, yeah, opponents can hurt Morishima, but to beat him, they're going to have to hit him with literally everything they have. While Morishima on the other end, he doesn't need to hit you with everything he has to win. Like just a few moves and you're dead because he's that much of a monster. Like I would have been into Morishima winning this match with just the lariat because he throws some great ones here. But to me, this is like flat out a great match. 4 stars. Like you said, there's maybe a little bit of softness in the middle where it slows down a bit. That's kind of doesn't quite build to the rest of the match. But this is just so much fun. Seeing Shingo throwing all those bombs at the Monster Champ to a degree that we haven't seen so far from Morishima. The big final minutes. I felt like the undercard on the show up to this point has been real good, like fun, but this felt meaty in a way the rest of the card hadn't so far, right? Like this crowd even, who had been very good all night up to this point, seemed to know that too. It felt like before this match, we had gotten a lot of really good appetizers, and this was like the first really good entree. This was like, oh, this is substantial.
So when you say meaty, do you also mean beefy?
Yeah, big. See, you know what? This match is better now. I mean, then than it would be now because fans would just be chanting slap beef and stuff like that.
Yeah,
over
meat
and, over
and beef and just. I mean, listen, you brought up the meat.
Yeah, I'm like Arby's, man. I have the meats, but the only negative to me about this whole match was I felt like this is another example we've seen a couple times in Ring of Honor where, like you said, where's this Shingo been this whole time? We've seen this I think a couple times where wrestlers like right when they're about to leave ROH, it's like they hit a new gear. And you're like, man, I wish this guy was here the whole time, you know? Like, this is clearly his best match at ROH from both, like, his personal performance, how good the match was in totality, how over he is with the crowd. Like, it feels like he hits a new level here and maybe has some potential to do more, but it's like, this is actually his goodbye. That's a little bit of a bittersweet thing, too.
Agreed.
So, and that brings us to Shingo's ROH run. I don't think we'll have as much to say about it as the other wrestlers, but I will say my memory of it was disappointing. And I think in hindsight, it was better than I remember. It certainly had some of its strongest moments in the closing stretch with like that 4-way in New York where it broke down to him and Jack. I think they had a real fun sequence there, even though if their singles match later was disappointing to me. The big tag title win over the Briscoes in the UK. And then this match, like he ended strong with some of his stronger performances. And I think you watch him in Ring of Honor this time, knowing what he becomes, you can see a lot of it here. Obviously, it's so early in his career, there's still like some developing left to do. And also, he wasn't getting opportunities in ROH to shine at this level. Like he got some matches with some high level talent, but he also got a bunch of multi-man matches. And other than the super brief surprise tag title run, the only thing of real like storyline substance he ever got to do was that really short 2-match, I guess, mini feud with Roderick Strong, which was based around Shingo Love tables. And, so it's like he wasn't called on to do a ton more than he did. And I'm glad we revisited it. I liked some of this stuff more than I remembered.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think the matches were better than I remembered, more dynamic. I think he added something to the show, but you know, it's a lot of just like, you're just seeing a stage in his development of what he would become. Yeah. Pretty clear that I think that him going to the U.S. at this point and working this style was helpful to him. I'm sure he would have been an all-time great no matter what, but I have to think that he reaped some real benefits from being there.
And immediately after the match, fans in the front row leap to give a standing ovation. Some chant ROH. Shingo and Morishima hug, and Morishima even raises Shingo's arm and shakes his hand. So, like, I felt like Morishima, both in how much he gave Shingo, but even in this post-match, it was like, because they're usually having Morishima being this character that's very grouchy and menacing, and
he just storms off, right? He storms in, he storms out, yeah.
And maybe he gives something by like a handshake at the end of a really big match, kind of begrudging, like you've earned my respect. But here he goes out of his way to like raise his arm even, and it really felt like Morishima was like, I really want to help this guy, you know?
Yeah.
And just a real generous spirit from him in this match. But our next Cabana memory is him challenging James Gibson during Gibson's brief run as ROH World Champion. And then we join Rebecca Bayless backstage at intermission. She's with the Motor City Machine Guns, and Alex Shelley is clearing his nose. Sabin says they've been waiting for this night for a long time, and they're going to let their credentials speak for themselves. Sabin says it's like the North versus the South, and he thinks it's going to be the same.
Delaware is the North. All right, anyway, go on.
Yeah, I was about to say, isn't Delaware the North? Yeah. But he says, but then again, the Briscoes wore...
Right, well, I'm yelling at them too. Delaware is the North.
Neither the Briscoes nor their opponents seem to realize that they're not from the South. But anyway, he thinks it's going to be the same result tonight as the North versus the South. Shelley says he hates rednecks, and talking about Mark Briscoe's prior horrifying injury WrestleMania weekend, says they're going to try tonight and make it a family affair in the hospital. They're going to send Jay to the hospital with a broken neck too this time. Shelley says the Briscoes may be brothers, but Sabin is his brother from another mother. They're not called the Murder City Machine Guns for nothing. They're going to kill the Briscoes, and dead men can't be tag team champions. Sabin then says to Shelley, "Your voice is beautiful." And Shelley ends the promo looking like he's trying not to laugh. I miss Alex Shelley in Ring of Honor so much. This promo, it was just like, he has so much charisma just in just a few short lines, like so much confidence and charisma and attitude in the best way. Like I missed him. I miss Alex Shelley so much in Ring of Honor.
Has he been showing that at all in WWE? I really haven't been watching.
I don't think he's been called on to do that a lot, and I don't know if he's going to get to be like the kind of half goofy, half asshole that I think he's like the best at. And so when we go to, I said at the top of the show, there was that little news thing that the ROH, website crashed because all the breaking news that happened during this show. Obviously Daniels leaving and cutting that promo, I think was one, but I think this was the other thing that probably caused the site to crash, which was, this probably happened around intermission, so this is why I'm putting it here. The Observer wrote, one of the biggest pops of the Chicago ROH card on April 28th was the announcement of the June 23rd show with Kenta versus Bryan Danielson. So yeah, I can imagine everyone back then, you would have been running to the message board going, holy shit, is this true? Are we going to get another Kenta Bryan Danielson match? And we were going to get one. We then go.
But I do want to just quickly say, interesting. Yeah. I'd forgotten that they were calling the MCMG the Murder City Machine Guns at this point, not the Motor City Machine Guns. I had forgotten that little detail, but I think it's cool.
Yeah, I'll talk about a little when we get to that match, but it's interesting because it points to a very specific time in their careers.
Yes.
We then go back to the ring where Bobby Dempsey is set to wrestle Alex Sugarfoot Payne, one of the ROH students. The crowd loves Sugarfoot for some reason. They're even chanting Sugarfoot. But before the match can even start, Tank Tolan walks to the ring and he grabs the mic. Tank gets into the ring. He introduces himself as an all-natural, superior athlete. He tells Bobby and Alex that wrestlers are men and athletes, and they're neither of those things. He tells Sugarfoot he should trade his trunks in for a training bra. He's built like a 12-year-old girl, for God's sakes. Tank then calls Dempsey Chunky Charlie and says that Dempsey is probably confused about if he should kiss out Sugarfoot or eat him. He then says to Bobby, quote, "Is it you or is it really or is it fat in here?" Which actually gets a few laughs and claps from the crowd. Tank asks if Bobby has ever heard of gluttony or self-respect. He continues to berate Bobby as the most disgusting person he's ever seen before telling him to pick his 5 chins up because he loves a challenge. Tank offers to turn Bobby from a chunk to a hunk, and he's going to make him just like him, a natural superior athlete. But there's more. Tank is going to show Bobby what a natural superior athlete is capable of doing when he lays a beat down on Sally Slim Jim over here. Tank hands Bobby his ring jacket and a grip trainer to practice on while he watches him from ringside. That brings us to Tank Tolan defeated Alex Payne via pinfall in 2 minutes, 40 seconds when he beat him after, I guess, basically, I don't know, like a one-handed spine buster. He just kind of tosses him down. Basically a squash for Toland. Chicago loves Sugarfoot. Like I said, they cheer him whenever he does anything on offense. Tank keeps up the personal trainer gimmick. He's doing jumping jacks on Payne. He's doing one-arm push-ups as he pins him for the win. So even though this is a show where there's no Chris Hero and no Larry Sweet, it actually is kind of like a significant part of their near future in ROH because this is where the Bobby Dempsey joining Sweet and Sour Incorporated angle starts right here. And it also is funny. I found that, even commentary was shitting on Bobby Dempsey, which made me feel bad because there's a point where Prazek notes Tank seems to see a lot in Bobby, and Lenny Leonard just kind of offhandedly goes, "A lot of donuts." I was like, "Hey, he's supposed to be like a
sympathetic, yeah."
Yeah, but before we get to the little post-match thing, did you have any thoughts about this? Not much of a match, again, just an excuse for the angle, but...
Yeah, I would say with, for Tolan, I think he plays his role well and it's entertaining. You know, like, obviously, like, it's funny that, like, he's always talking about natural athlete because, you know, I mean, I'm sure this is part of the joke, but, like, the joke obviously being natural, like, where he's obviously, like, has what people might call a steroid-looking body. But also just in terms of athlete, like, you don't really... When you think of, like, someone who's really athletic, you don't think of somebody with that kind of build. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Bodybuilders often are people that are very good at doing one thing, which is having muscles.
Right.
Like, not that isn't hard work, but yeah, like, exactly what you said. Weightlifters or bodybuilders aren't necessarily great all-around athletes as a rule.
Yeah. I do think when we talk about, like, somebody being better than you remember, I think Tolan has been better than I remembered in ROH. Like, I think he does a good job projecting his character. Like, his delivery is a little bit clumsy. He's not, like, a great promo or anything, but the idea is good, I think.
Yeah. He's a little cartoonish, but it works for his role on the card.
Right.
And after the match, Tank again gets on the mic and he tells Bobby he's going to make Dempsey just like him, striking features with a chiseled physique. He asks Bobby for his decision, if he's going to join up with Tank or not. And Bobby gets exactly, I would say, one syllable of sound out of his mouth before Tank cuts him off and goes, "You made the right call." So again, the whole story is he's just bullying Bobby into this. We don't even know if Bobby really wants this. I love this. One fan throws a streamer at Tank, and Tank grabs it, and he goes, "For me? Ha ha!" Like instead of being like, "How dare you, you're mocking," he's just like, "Yeah, this is great. You throw me a streamer."
Are you sure? Are you sure it wasn't toilet paper? I know this goes back to 2005 when I used to make fun of you for not being able to tell the difference between a streamer and toilet paper, but I'm pretty sure it was toilet paper.
Oh, see, Matt, I am toilet paper blind, which is a horror for my personal life. But Tank then walks to the back with Bobby and has Bobby do lunges with him as they do, which is just awesome. And I completely agree with you. I think Tank has been one of those people, maybe my little indie wrestling ROH has to be super serious and do things a certain way. I probably did not appreciate him as much as I do now, where I'm a little less of a stick in the mud and about what I want from wrestling. And, you know, we were talking about, you know, maybe how people remembered. Well, The Observer apparently remembered because Dave wrote in The Observer about this show. Toland is apparently great in his new role as a physical trainer for an out-of-shape Bobby Dempsey. And, yeah, he absolutely was. Next, we have another Colt memory. This one being Colt getting on the mic to tell Homicide that he'd better kill him during their ghetto street fight. And that brings us to Roderick Strong, scored to the ring by Rocky Romero, defeating Jack Evans via pinfall in 15 minutes, 10 seconds when he hit a razor's edge into a cutter. This is a rematch of their match WrestleMania weekend at All-Star Extravaganza 3, which I think we both thought was great. I thought this match was also a lot of fun, but a little bit worse. It's actually pretty similar to their Mania match. It's significantly shorter by about, I think 6 minutes, but still has that same back and forth flow. No one controls very long. You're never far away from the next big Jack Evans bump, and when Jack does one of those bumps, you're never far away from his next big flying move. So I'd say, like, the positive of this match is it's a lot like their last match, which was great, but the negative of this match is it's a lot like their last match. Like, there isn't a different vibe. A lot of the spots in their first match, that match we just referenced in ROH, they're redone here. Some have slight new twists, like instead of Roddy knocking Jack off the ropes when Jack's going for a flying move and Jack crashing and burning, Jack goes for a flying move on the barricade and Roddy knocks him off the barricade and Jack crashes and burns. But there are some spots like when Roddy drops Jack from the apron to the floor like a bag of trash, that's just repeated. Those spots are just repeated verbatim. Looks exactly the same here. I think it would be impossible for these two to have a non-entertaining match against each other. Like, Jack is made to take a beating. Roddy is made to give a beating. We get the usual fun of, like, Jack is getting tied in knots and bent in half, like, both against the ring post and in one of the gnarlier Romero specials I think you'll ever see. But Jack also takes some special insane bumps here. Like, there's a brutal bump he takes where he takes a belly to back suplex basically on the side of his face. He rotates that much, and that's where he lands, like side of face first. There's another spot where Roddy flips Jack over the ropes to the floor, and Jack hits the ring apron on the way down. We also get like a nice twist on their last ROH match where in that match, Roddy did this crazy slingshot suplex on Jack where Jack kept rotating more than you'd expect and landed on his face. And this time Jack rotates, but he rotates so much out of the slingshot that he lands on his feet and doesn't take the suplex. So I thought, oh, that's a neat play on their last match. What this match I would say is missing that the first had is a lot of Roddy's crowd work. I felt he did a really good job in that last match they had together. It was one of his best performances as a character I've ever seen from him, where he really threaded in crowd work with the moves throughout the match really organically. This match cuts that character work way back to mostly just focus on the moves. And then we get the finish, which is an interference finish where Rocky hits Jack with a kick to the head behind the ref's back, and then Roddy hits the razor's edge into the cutter. So Rocky has knocked Jack out on both nights of the double shot, and they're selling, I guess, that he'll be out for a while, leading to a Rocky versus Jack match we'll get 5 months from now. I thought their last match was great. I'd call this one very good, like 3 3/4 stars. But I also feel like maybe that's also because I saw that match first. Maybe if I saw this match first, I'd feel different. But you watch the matches in the order you watch them in. What do you think?
I would probably echo you to a T. Like, I don't think you were wrong about anything. It was really, really good. Still with cool, interesting moves. A lot of them repeated, but some of them new. Like you mentioned, that bump off the back suplex was just out of control. Like, I also really liked Evans escaping the Gibson driver with the kick and going for the poison rana, and then getting dropped neck first over before getting the Boston Crab near the end. There was also a spot. Like, did you notice this? Where let me find exactly in my notes what he did. But, yeah, okay, so Strong goes for a superplex, but Evans hits the Tree of Woe double knees. But when he's doing it, did you notice that Evans yelled, "I'm Jack," while he was doing that move?
What was that supposed to be like? When did Chappelle's show go? Was it supposed to be like a "I'm Rick James" bitch moment from Jack Evans?
Maybe he was dropping down the knees. I'm pretty sure. Yeah, I'm Jack. Like, I mean, he yelled something, and I'm pretty sure that's what it was. So I mean, the first match didn't have that, so you can put that as a point in its favor. But yeah, I would say overall, it was. A little bit repetitive of the first match, and the ending was so much cheaper, which I took it down a little bit. But these two have such great chemistry with each other. They're willing to do things with each other and try things. And I could watch these two wrestle many more times than this. They're a great pairing, both as a team and as opponents.
And we're going to get to see them wrestle each other at least a couple more times. But I think this is every other one now is going to be a gimmick match, right? Because I think there's like a no DQ and then a cage match. Right. So we'll see if those kind of mix it up a bit more too. But Dave wrote in The Observer, Evans did an injury angle on the show where he's doing a concussion deal since he's going to Dragon Gate for 6 months. Evans will return after his tour. I read that and I thought, that can't be right. And I looked it up just to make sure because I was like, this isn't my memory. And yeah, Dave is wrong here. He's actually back in 2.5 months because that'd be kind of crazy if this was 6 months with the faction warfare stuff. But he is gone for a little while, which again, yet another documented thing of what hurts faction warfare. Jack still hasn't formed the third faction and now he's going to be gone for 2.5 months. So just not the right players maybe for this feud in some respects.
Or again, they could have just not had Jack say he was forming a crew.
Yeah.
And until when he was ready to do it.
And did you notice this moment in the match where this is something I love when wrestlers forget rules of matches. I think this is legitimate. Roddy at one point he's been fighting Jack on the floor and Jack's hurt, and Roddy gets up on the apron. He stands on the apron and he's seemingly about to like step through the ropes for a second to break the count so then he can go back out. And then he goes to the fans, "No count out, huh?" And then he goes back to ringside, and I think he legitimately forgot this wasn't like an FIP title match. It was like, right. Oh, if I'm here on the floor for a while, I have to break the count. And then he got and was like, oh wait, this isn't for the title. And which is always a cute little moment when that happens.
I mean, when wrestlers have to wrestle in these different promotions with different rules, it probably does throw off the way they work a match and the way that they plot out what they're going to do.
Yeah, for sure. So after the match, Dave Prazak notes that Rocky has knocked Jack out on 2 consecutive nights, and that Jack might have 2 separate concussions from these last 2 nights, which is, I feel like, is something they wouldn't try to sell a few months from now in a post-Benoit world. Rocky throws a chair in the ring and Roddy holds it so Rocky can kick it into Jack's face, which he does. The beatdown continues until, you guessed it, Delirious chases them away with a chair. Commentary, that's the other thing I want to mention. Commentary made a point during the Jack and Roddy match that to say that Jack is still looking at forming a faction, and you never know. Maybe his first member's backstage watching them, and we might see them tonight. So I don't know if that means we're supposed to think that Delirious is his first member, but either way, that's not how it turns out. But it was kind of a weird, because they were really, if you listen to commentary, there was a moment where we really felt like they were saying like, oh, maybe you're going to see the first member tonight, and we don't. But our next Colt Cabana memory is him taking Bryan Danielson on at Gut Check, the match infamous for Bryan suffering a major shoulder injury minutes into a match that was scheduled to be a 60-minute time limit draw, and him just gunning through the thing. So it's weird because, like, in a way, kind of a notable match in Colt's career, but like more notable for the bad thing that happened for the other guy than like the quality of the match or what it meant to Colt. But that brings us to the ROH World Tag Team title match. The Briscoes, Jay and Mark, successfully defend the titles when they defeat the Murder City Machine Guns of Alex Shelley and Chris Sabin in 34 minutes, 17 seconds, when Mark pinned Shelley after he and Jay hit him with a simultaneous cutthroat driver and top rope leg drop. So going to what I was saying before, I'll get to before, on paper, this is like a dream match between two of the most respected tag teams of their generation. But it's important to remember that at this point in history, Shelley and Sabin being a tag team was a very new thing. Like, they started as a combo in 01 in Japan in the second half of 2006. And then they started working indies as a team during the same period, like most notably in PWG. But in terms of TNA, where they really built their name, they had only started working there as a team, I think, the month before this match on Explosion. Like, in fact, like you were saying, like, they're so early in their tenure here that they're still working as the Murder City Machine Guns, which is a name they're still going to change to the less aggressive Motor City Machine Guns moniker. Matt, I have a ton of notes of thoughts about this match that are kind of complicated, but it is your turn, thankfully, to go first. This is a very beloved and well-remembered match from this era. What do you think rewatching after all this time?
All right. Well, then I will not belabor my thoughts, but
no, go belabor away, please.
No,
please.
No, I don't think I have nearly as much to say about it as you. I mean, like, so I don't think I'm going to take that long. But like, well, first of all, Meltzer said that in his notes that they went 10 minutes longer than was planned. But if you watch the beginning of this match, it's pretty clear they were working for a long match, right? Like, they started very slowly. And, the Motor City Machine Guns do subtle heel stuff, like, like Sabin backing off and hugging Shelley for consolation, or like Shelley grinding his elbow into the Briscoes instead of giving a clean break and stuff like that. But they're not like dastardly heels at all in this match. It's it's just like a clean wrestling match where guys are aggressive, and everything is very well executed. They do a really good job of making the moves look good and clean, especially the Motor City Machine Guns. They really do have like a polish to them right away that is impressive. I also found that like this was a different kind of working style for Shelley, because when Shelley was in ROH the first time, he wasn't like, I mean, he did good high spots and he was, he was smooth, but he wasn't like a fast-paced high spot guy. You know what I mean? Like, that wasn't his thing, and I think he's able to transition to it well here. He definitely adds a lot of personality to the match, but there's it builds slowly. It really does. So like the first 2/3 of the match isn't like, it's really good, but it's not like, oh wow, this is so memorable, this is so different. It's just like quality stuff. And it's a lot like other Briscoes matches in that it's just like very, very, very like back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. There's not like a really protracted heat segment, the way that, there could be, and that's a normal Briscoes thing. In fact, while the Murder City Machine Guns are the heels, I don't think they ever really got an extended heat segment on either of the Briscoes. In fact, I think the longest heat segment is the Briscoes against Sabin. Am I wrong about that?
I think there was one heat segment for one of the machine guns. I forget which one, but it wasn't very long. But quite frankly, neither was the heat segment on 7. It was very, like you were saying, the Briscoes of that era, which is there's usually each team gets a heat segment, but it's usually so not that long, so it doesn't really even build to like a very like cathartic hot tag because it's just like, oh, they can take control for like 2 minutes.
Yeah, it's very unusual to have such a long tag team match. I think this is probably the longest ROH match of 2007 so far. It's very unusual to have such a long tag team match without like significant heat segments. That's a very unusual way to structure a match, I would say. And, I don't always love that. Even in this match, I wish there was more of a heat segment. But they do keep it entertaining. There's a spot like pretty like, 20 something minutes in where they do a lot of double team moves and, like the Motor City Machine Guns. They put Mark in the Tree of Woe and hit like 2 drop kicks to the head, and then they follow up with stereo topes and stuff. But then it slows down again with Jay, locking in the stretch plum, and the Briscoes get some double team combos and stuff. And then eventually Sabin tags in Shelley, and that's when they hit another like big sequence with Shelley hitting kicks on both Briscoes, and then amazingly, this is like really late in the match. It slows down again as the Murder City Machine Guns work over Jay, and Jay ends up tripping Sabin into drop kicking Shelley, and then drop toe hold Sabin into Shelley's crotch, and then Mark gets a hot tag, and that's when things pop off. Like it just becomes like over the top, awesome final sequence. Probably my favorite final like high spot sequence in a regular ROH tag team title match. I'll try to run through some of the highlights here. Mark does some redneck kung fu when he gets tagged in. There's I think the best spot of the match, which is the Briscoes going for the Doomsday Device, but Shelley stalls Mark by grabbing his foot, and then Sabin hits him on the springboard while Mark is springing off, and then immediately reverse Rana's Jay. I thought that was a really great spot. The Sabin and Shelley hit a combo of kicks and then assisted slice spread number 2 for a near fall on Mark. There's a spot where the Motor City Machine Guns hit like a simultaneous top rope splash leg drop combo on Mark, but Jay breaks that up. Do they still do that move? The simultaneous top rope splash and leg drop?
I'm not sure about like their WWE era.
Yeah.
Matt, I don't always watch all the WWE, believe it or not. I watched WrestleMania.
Yeah, the only Motor City Machine Guns WWE match I've seen is the one at the Royal Rumble, which was not the best. So I really have no sense of it. But yeah, there's a spot where Shelley goes for the air raid crash and Mark fights out, and Jay clotheslines Shelley to the floor, and then Mark hits a crazy dive onto Sabin, and then Jay goes for the Jay Driller on Shelley, but Shelley kicks him, so Jay hits him with the military DVD or Death Valley Driver instead. Mark follows that with a shooting star press on Shelley, but Sabin breaks that up, gets a huge reaction. Then Sabin and Jay hit simultaneous forearms, and Sabin hits an enziguri, and then goes to the top rope, but Mark crotches him, and Mark goes for a top rope cutthroat driver, but Shelley cuts it off. They hit a Doomsday Missile drop kick on Mark, and Shelley follows that with a super kick and an air raid crash, another really good near fall. Shelley really hits a very nicely done clean shell shock on Mark, and Jay breaks that up. Then Mark blocks the slice spread number 2 and hits the cutthroat driver, and Shelley actually kicks out, which I was surprised by. And there was a big ROH chant. And then Mark follows that with another cutthroat driver, and Jay assists him with a leg drop as well, and they get the pin off of that. So, yeah, like I said, the closing sequence to me was as good as any we've seen in an ROH tag title match. I thought that was spectacular, and the rest of the match had excellent work. I thought the layout was maybe a little all over the place, but, still a great match. I think could have used a little more focus for me to declare it like a top-tier match of the year candidate. I still actually think that Shingo against Morishima might be my favorite match on this show after watching them both back. But I still think the ending was as exciting as anything we've seen in a while. So this was definitely a great match.
I would encourage everyone to start a podcast where it doesn't have to be about wrestling, but just a podcast where you and a friend talk about something, because there are very few like more satisfying, simple pleasures in life than when you each like watch something and then, or consume whatever the things, play a game, eat a food, and then be like, oh, I feel like my opinion's going to be a little out of step. And then you let your co-host go first and they like completely agree with you. Cause I was like, am I going to be controversial for saying I like Shingo, Morishima better than this, and like I have a little problems with some of the layout.
Yeah, no. Before you get going, I will say I think I like Shingo Morishima more than you did, and so I probably like this more than you did in terms.
Yo, you definitely like this match more than me, but I think we agree. It's like a lot of times where we agree on the same points. It's just one of us feels them a bit more deeply than the other person, but we kind of intellectually go, we have the same issues or like the same things about it.
Right.
But so yeah, I actually don't remember what my thoughts of this match were at the time, which is strange because this is a notable match from this era. And I really wish I did, because I'm dying to know if I always felt the way I did about this match or if my opinion has changed over time, because this is a really rare example through the years of a beloved ROH match from the first 5 years that I'm considerably lower than the consensus on. Like, don't get me wrong, I had some fun watching this match back here in 2025. There are some great elements to this match, but if you look at reviews, both ones at the time and even some retrospective ones that have been done years later, you see a lot of people reviewing this at either 5 stars or close to it, calling it one of the best tag matches, best ROH matches of the year, maybe even beyond that. I know our former guest friend of the show, Jeff Schwartz of an honorable mention, I believe on their episode covering Good Times, Great Memories, he said like this might be like the greatest ROH tag team match of all time. And I wish I saw it like everyone else did, because I like to have fun, but I did have fun, but not
Trevor, people listen to the show. The Deep Vein
I hate having fun.
Yeah, we know how you really feel about fun. Don't even try it.
I like people just abusing me and getting mad at me for watching WrestleMania. But this was so like you said, there was a report in The Observer, like you said, where Dave said that this match these guys went 10 minutes over their allotted time. And I can believe that because Gabe never, I even went back just to make sure, Gabe never books tag matches to go this long. Like we're never breaking the 30-minute barrier, let alone this was like 34 or whatever. Like normally for big tag team matches, he goes about 25 minutes, which is coincidentally about give or take a minute what this would have been if two teams didn't go 10 minutes over the allotted time. So, and to me, it feels like it. Like the simultaneous biggest strength and weakness for this match, just like the Roddy Jack match, I feel like the strength and the weakness are the same thing, is how much stuff these two teams do. Like this felt like a peak example of this era of indie wrestling where the people in the match decide, let's fire every single bullet we have, no pun intended. Did you like that analogy, man? I landed it. Just call me Nathan Fielder. They just do every single thing that they can do. And the first half of this match follows a pretty traditional structure for the era. Like you said, it felt like a Briscoes match of 2006, 2007. It's a little slow to start, maybe, but fun enough. Like for my taste, a tiny bit of Matt and chain wrestling and Alex Shelley doing a lot of shtick. And like you said, they're not necessarily evil. They're just being kind of assholes. Like, and I missed Alex Shelley so much. Like, he's such a master of shtick. Like he picks right up where he left off from the old ROH tag team he had with Jimmy Rave, which was great, where like early in this match, Sabin gets slapped and Shelley's staying on the apron and he's holding his own face in sympathy for seeing Sabin get slapped. And then Sabin stumbles back into the corner and selling. And Shelley is such a douche. He does the thing where he just drops down to the apron. So just in case Sabin wants to tag him in because he doesn't want the tag. And then later on when Sabin gets hurt again, he's hugging Sabin and he's stroking Sabin's hair. He's patting Sabin's ass when he tags out. Then later on, he's like, takes a drink of water and then draws a line in the middle of the ring. Like, I dare you to cross this line, this imaginary line, Jay. And then when Jay crosses it, Shelley gets down on his hands and knees to beg off. He's like kissing Jay's boots. And then he reveals he never drank his water and he spits it in Jay's face. Like, he's just such an asshole in the most satisfying way. And Shelley is also just so good at finding so many little organic moments to emote in matches. Like, there are so many times in this match where before he takes or does a move, he'll take 1 half second to have a facial expression, a mannerism, a reaction that is appropriate for that moment. when I feel like so many of his contemporaries, they just be focusing on hitting the next move as fast as possible. The thing is, it doesn't really slow him down. Like, he's doing the whiz-bang, fast-paced, tons of move sequences like you see from others. He's just squeezing in those little bits of more personality in the tight time window between those spots. So a lot of praise I have for, I'm big Alex Shelley fan here. But anyway, the match goes from that start, and I feel like a more standard structure of that era, a lot of tags, back and forth, like you said, where no team gets a long thing. Maybe, like I said, those very obligatory, like 2-minute face and peril spots that don't really build to anything. And then there's this moment where everyone is getting in the ring. I think you acknowledge it when Mark tags in. And we're seeing more double teams. The machine guns hit a double dive to the floor. The pace is getting a little faster. And I'm thinking, okay, this is, again, another thing that's very ROH 2006-2000 tag match style, which is we've now had that second kind of weak hot tag, and we've flicked the switch where now everyone's getting in the ring more often. We're respecting tags less, and it's just going to be a 3 to 5 to 7 minute final minutes of the match where it's just a sprint of everyone coming in and out doing crazy stuff to the finish. And then I looked at the clock, and knowing how long this match was, at that moment, I saw there was still 17 minutes left in this match. And I was like, well, this is going to be different because they have literally half the match to fill. It feels like we're getting to the point where we'd have like 5 minutes left. And something I've referenced before is Samoa Joe saying in a shoot interview that his belief that a match shouldn't go down. Like, if a match starts at a 3 in terms of intensity or excitement and it builds to a 7, you can keep it at a 7 for a while or forever. You can go to an 8 or higher. But once you get to a 7, you probably shouldn't drop it down below a 7. I've said before, I don't agree with that. I think in all cases, I think there's a bunch of great ways to pace a match. It can ebb and flow. You can start hot to grab a crowd's attention, then slow it down for the middle, then build it back up for the finish. There's a lot of ways to cook an egg, but for this kind of match, I actually kind of agree with that Samoa Joe philosophy, which is the big moves-based match that's based just around not a lot of psychology or story. It's 4 guys doing a lot of stuff and a lot of cool stuff at that, and it's really just exciting you on that bright, shiny object level. I think the problem, you were talking about your thing with structure. For me, the way I kind of saw my issue with the structure of this match was, I feel like going by Joe's philosophy, if you watch this match, at the middle mark of that match, that point I talked about, it jumps from like a 5 to a 9. Then it drops, after a couple minutes, it drops down to a 6. Then it goes back up to a 9. Then it goes to a 5. Then we're back up to a 7. And to me, that's fatiguing. Like, to me, spot fests are kind of like fireworks shows where fireworks shows are not generally considered high art. They're not telling a fireworks show isn't usually telling a story, but they can be a lot of fun. And there's a kind of artistry to them in the sense of, I feel like a good fireworks show builds to the biggest fireworks at the end. Like, things get more and more exciting and elaborate, and then they peak at the end. Like, if you see a 5 out of 10 level cool firework, and all you've seen so far that night is ones that are 4 or below, you're really wowed because it's literally the coolest thing you've seen so far that night. But you're getting maximum enjoyment out of that firework. But if you see 3 minutes of 7 out of 10 fireworks, and then they go back to a 5 out of 10 firework, all of a sudden you're not appreciating it the way you would have a few minutes earlier, because it is now not even like the 3rd or 4th coolest thing you've seen in the last few minutes. And they're now oddly disappointing. You're not getting maximum value. And so when I watch this match, the effort level from these 4 guys is friggin' off the charts. They're aiming to do so much that they're blowing well past their allotted time. But to me, it's kind of fatiguing because of the fact that the excitement of this match kept jumping up and down. It's not that it's ever boring. Like, if I'm using my little number analogy, this match never goes down to like a 3 or anything like that. But there are a lot of spots where I'm like a little more numb to moments of this match than I wish it was, than I think a lot of people that I've seen review this match are. They aren't numb. My cold heart didn't heat up enough for certain segments of this. And I feel like it's because of the way the match was structured. Like, they weren't getting the most out of every firework for me. But once again, reviews didn't agree with me. The fans in the building and fans online didn't feel that way. But I wish they had trimmed a few minutes and then did most of what they did in this match, but just put it in a different order where the moves always were getting cooler. It was always getting bigger and faster. And I think on the last episode I mentioned how I often don't look at other people's reviews of matches when I come to do this podcast, because and when I do read other reviews, it's only after I've rewatched the matches and form my own opinion, so my opinion doesn't get tainted. But there are times where like I have to look at not just some reviews, but a million reviews because I feel like I'm crazy. This is one of those moments again, just like last show. And like I said earlier, I found including reviewers I often agree with, their reviews were often sky high for this match. Like Cage Match's average rating for this match, last time I checked, was 9.24 out of 10 based on 86 different voters. So that's like 4 3/4 star territory there. And people generally see this as an incredible match. But there was one review I agreed with, a lot of it. And so I want to do something I almost never do on the show, which is I want to read someone else's review, or not the whole thing, but just a couple paragraphs. And it's from a blog called Handwork Wrestling from handworkreviews.wordpress.com, and Handwork is spelled Handwerk. And I've read them before. I don't always agree with them, but they're hard markers, sometimes maybe a little contrarian or against consensus, which is not a negative to me. And most importantly, I just think the writing is good and interesting. And also, fun fact, years ago, before this guy started their blog, I had a wrestling review blog that was short-lived called Work the Hand, so I'm going to sue them. But the first quote I want to read from his review was this, which was, he wrote, "My least favorite version of the Briscoes came in 2007 during their big sort of rigging the Wrestling Observer newsletter ballot prestige wrestling run with the ROH tag team titles. While you have the undeniable stuff like the Sting Generico feud or the pay-per-view match against Claudio and Seidel, there's also so many dull, overlong epics that drag it way down. Long matches are great matches," he's saying that sarcastically. "This sort of checklist being ticked off in a way that feels maybe not outright phony. It is still the Briscoes after all, but that always felt so much more manufactured than the majority of their work before and after. This is nowhere near the worst offender. I do actually like this match, problems and all, but as a half-hour plus epic where clearly 20-ish is the natural wheelhouse of everyone involved, it suffers under the weight of those certain expectations." And so before I get to his second quote, I'll say I liked reading that quote because it kind of put a point on something I've been struggling with on rewatch, which is I really don't like the 2006-2007 Briscoes quite as much as I like them before and after, for some of those reasons, where I feel like we've had a lot of matches, Matt, where we've watched them in this comeback era where we're like, they're working 110% crazy level effort, and the matches are exciting, and they're almost always at least good, but there've been matches where we're like, oh, this is a little fatiguing, and maybe like a little more substance, a little more flow, a little less back your move, my move all the way through. And to me, like the Briscoes of the early ROH era, like they did better selling. I feel like the Briscoes of later era kind of have a little bit more intangibles. Like, do you kind of agree with all of that? But before I say that, I do want to say they do lots of great stuff with it. Like when they hit in this era, like the Kings of Wrestling final battle match, the Aries and Strong match in the UK, the match the first match they had with Shingo and Doi this year, like even in this era, which I'm a little lower on maybe than some people, when they hit, they friggin' hit. But like, do you kind of agree with that general sentiment?
Well, just the idea that their matches can be kind of formless, and they kind of need another team to rein them in a little bit. And I think that's why they meshed so well in that match against the Kings of Wrestling. I think the Kings of Wrestling are like really good at that, especially Hero, of like putting a match together and like giving it direction. And I think that match had a lot more direction than some of their other matches. But yeah, I totally agree. It's actually, what also was one of their standout performances was actually the singles matches they had against each other. Like the one they had in the UK was one of the best matches they had during this run, period. So, maybe they could have done some more singles stuff. But yeah, I think that they were just playing with the formula of the tag team match in a way that maybe wasn't to their benefit during this era.
But then there's the second quote, and I like this too because I had already did my notes for this match and come with my fireworks analogy when I was thinking about my thoughts of this match, and then I read this quote from this review. on this match. When the switch does flip, the fireworks show is amazing. A bunch of really cool ideas. For this jumble of stuff presented here, almost all of the individual concepts whip ass. And when they finally just present it as a pure display of stuff and hit the gas entirely, it feels like the match people always say it is. Like all they saw was a 90s Japanese TV version of it that only had the last 10 minutes. The crowd is obscenely into it, making near falls far bigger and more engaging than they might seem on paper, and was essentially a cool moves arm race. The coolest and sickest move in the Briscoe's old Briscoe's old cutthroat driver flying leg drop move gets the win, as it should. Really, that's what gets me. That's what there's still as good as and sometimes great as it is. And like I agree with almost entirely that I think the final minutes are fantastic, and like when they're going at a 10 out of 10, it really does feel special. It's just there's a lot there. And I feel like it's almost too much for me. But when it is just like he said, when they put the pedal to the max at the end, so great. And I feel like those last 5 minutes of this match, those guys flick the switch all the way up and go, okay, no more backstepping. We're going to be 10 out of 10 the rest of the way. And it's fucking great. And the one thing I will disagree with that quote I read was, I do think the cutthroat driver and flying leg drop combo is awesome, and usually it is cooler than a shooting star press, but I feel like they should have ended this match on the shooting star press, because maybe not when they did it, but like Mark does it a little early in the match, and he looks to the crowd for a sec, like kind of plays to the crowd to a second and hesitates, and in that moment, he knows, you know, the crowd knows, the announcers talk about it, that like, oh, he's going for the shooting star press for the first time after he, at least here, since he nearly died doing one. And when he hits it, it gets like a bigger reaction and a bigger near fall like than it normally would. And to me, I think it just would have been such a great moment. It's like, especially since like the machine guns mocked him right after for doing it. It would have been a great full circle moment if he won the match being like, I'm going to face my fear. I'm going to do it again. I'm going to hit it this time. And that's going to be how I beat you. And instead they just go for like a cool move combo. But, yeah, so to sum up, there's a lot I like in this match. I like Shelley's stick. I really like the final 5 minutes. I love that they got the crowd to legitimately, like you were mentioning, buy into the fact that the machine guns could win the titles on a Shelley air raid crash. Because the fans, like you said, go nuts for that near fall. I love the machine guns' really snappy little 3 or 4 move combos, which all feel like set plays rather than convoluted things we're supposed to believe they all just came up with on the fly. They feel very like prepared in a good way. But I also was just exhausted by this match. So I don't see it the way most people see it. I don't see it as one of the Briscoes' best matches of the era even. I don't even see it as, I see it as a flawed 3 3/4 star match. Very good with some great highlights. I think it's not even the best match of their title. I think I like the matches I said before better. All those tag matches I said before, I think they're better in this era than this, even though this is remembered by some people as like the match. But then the other funny thing is, there were a couple, the people that seem to review this match lower wrote the live reports, because this is Dave in the Observer. Dave wrote, match went 34-19, about 10 minutes longer than it was booked for, and was in the 4-star range as well. It started slow, but ended with tons of near falls. So that's just what you said earlier about Dave saying that. Sabin and Shelley looked to be an incredible team, and they got over big as a unit on the last TNA pay-per-view show. So, yeah, that's my thoughts on the match.
They have a rematch a year later. It'll be interesting to see how that compares.
Yeah, they work 4 matches in the next year, including some big name like opponents. So yeah, it's Alex Shelley gets a welcome back chant when he comes out, and it's one of those ones where I felt bad because when the Briscoes come out, we get dueling chants of Alex Shelley and Let's Go Briscoes, and Chris Sabin just has to stand there. I'm like, but then later, eventually, some fan does do a very short Hail Sabin chant. And then, Matt, did you notice that Jay Briscoe loses his gum during this match and puts it back in his mouth, which is something I think we've seen from him in Ring of Honor at least 3 times now, to the point where it's almost becoming like part of his gimmick, where, I don't know if you noticed this, when he puts the gum back in his mouth this time, he does it with like a little flourish to the fans first, like, you know I'm doing it. So it's becoming like old hat for him. It's that time where I lose my gum and put it back in my mouth after it's touched the disgusting mat.
A classic Jay gross move.
So immediately after the match, the audience gives it a big standing ovation. Dave Prazak on commentary calls the match an absolute classic as the Briscoes pose and celebrate for a while. Shelley sells for a long time, and he and Sabin get a please come back chant. And again, they would come back for 4 matches in 2008. The Briscoes shake hands with the Machine Guns, and Shelley and Sabin snatch the tag titles away from the Briscoes as they try and leave, only though so that they can strap them around the brothers' waists for them, and then all 4 guys raise each other's hand, almost like a little curtain call, like hey, we really did something good here. Our next and final Colt Cabana Best Times, Best Memories is Colt battling Jimmy Jacobs in their brutal Chicago street fight at the 5th Year Festival of Chicago. We then go backstage to join Roderick Strong and Rocky Romero. Rocky says Jack Evans isn't going to start his own faction now. He's not going to get out of the hospital so easily this time. Roddy says the Brazilians will end up there soon too. Roddy then says ever since he knocked Delirious loopy, he's been obsessed with Roddy, all up in his business, and Roddy's giving him this only warning that if he keeps doing it, he'll not be responsible for what happens to him. So, I don't know if you have anything to say about that. We're leaning into the Delirious Roddy feud.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good move. I mean, they've been building it up as like Roderick's scariest competitor at this point. So let's get to it.
And with Jack gone for a while and Aries about to be gone,
yes,
you kind of need someone else to focus on. And that brings us to our main event. Colt Cabana defeated Adam Pearce via submission in 13:31 when he made him tap out to the Billy Goat's curse. This, of course, is Colt's ROH farewell. He would not wrestle for during this era. He would not wrestle for the promotion again until the 7th anniversary show in 2009. On commentary, Prazak says that Colt handpicked Pearce to be his final opponent because he looked up to Pearce when he came up in the business. I actually don't have a ton to say about this match. It was actually kind of a relief considering how many things we've had to talk about. But as a match, this is super low stakes. Colt doesn't do much beyond play some of his hits. You've seen a million Colt matches that are better wrestling than this. I think you've seen a million of them that are funnier than this, that are more inventive than this. The fun is that this is a lot like the Punk farewell match, also in Chicago, also against Colt. It's a victory lap for a guy that's leaving in front of a hometown crowd that is there to warmly say goodbye to that person. Although I will say that the Punk Colt match, which even that one wasn't particularly amazing match. I felt like they tried hard to have an actual wrestling match than this one did. Colt has the rapper who does his theme song perform it live as he makes his entrance. Colt gets 1 million streamers on the Honorable Mention podcast. They muse that they think that maybe this is the most streamers ever for an entrance in Ring of Honor history. I'm not 100% sure. I would not argue with that. It's an obscene amount of streamers here.
Yeah, I mean, the only competition would be Punk.
Yeah, Chicago fans, they love 2 things, Matt. They love their sausages, they love their streamers. But we get a loud thank you Colt chant before the match even begins. And I thought the other fun thing about this match is Pearce is a great straight man. Like, he's constantly yelling and falling for things and being aggrieved. He actually works I would say he actually works significantly harder than Colt here. Like, he even breaks out a top rope leg drop, and in my favorite spot of the match, he catches Colt mid-flying butt in the corner and turns it into a German suplex, which is really cool. I'm surprised that more people didn't do that. Colt feels almost like he's in trying not to get hurt before I join WWE mode. And he doesn't even go for the Colt 45 here. He wins with the Billy Goat's Curse, which is a move he almost hardly ever won in ROH with. Actually, I would say the highlight of this match, Matt, might have been Colt hitting Pearce with a bottle of Gold Bond powder as Prazak commentates it. Because for people who don't know, Colt and Pearce were both once members of a stable on the U.S. indie scene, along with CM Punk, Dave Prazak, Chris Hero, and others, called the Gold Bond Mafia, which, as CM Punk once explained in a shoot interview, came to be because some of the boys discovered that if you put Gold Bond powder on your testicles, not the regular yellow bottle that's used in this match, but the green bottle medicated version that has like menthol or something in it, it makes your balls tingle and feels like someone is blowing on them. And Matt, did a young me buy a bottle of this to try after hearing this shoot interview? Yes. Does it feel that way? Kinda. Did I feel absolutely humiliated once I had done that, knowing I had bought a bottle of Gold Bond to put on my testicles because I listened to CM Punk when I was like 22 say, hey, this is cool? Yes, it is not worth it. It is not worth your dignity, I would say. But I laughed seeing this happen.
Trevor, I'm not going to comment. I'm gonna let you feel the way you feel about that.
You know, I will say this: if you have a bottle of Gold Bond medicated powder at home and you are a gentleman, or hey, maybe it would work for one. You know what? I'm not. You know what? I'm not medically qualified to recommend this for one. I'm not even really medically qualified to recommend this for men. But I will say this:
Trevor, you're medically qualified. You are.
If we had Dr. Keith on as a doctor, he could.
Yeah, no, you are the doctor of Twitter.
I'm the doctor of tweetonomics. No. Okay, that's horrible. We should edit that line. That was a horrible ad lib. Anyway,
I'm not going to edit.
Matt,
if there were things on this show that I was going to edit that you said, would not be that. Would not be that.
Matt, I will just say, if you're a man, you own a bottle of Gold Bond green bottle of medicated powder already, give it a shot one time. Live a little. But is it worth it to buy a bottle of it? No. Do not do that. So, anyway, this is a paper thin match.
Yeah. This is the main event, Trevor. Get your mind out of the gutter. Focus.
This is a paper thin match that your enjoyment of is going to live or die based on how much you like Colt Cabana and want to see him celebrated. For that reason, I almost can't give this match a rating. It is, do you like Colt? Do you want to say goodbye to him? Here's a match. What'd you think?
I think I liked it a little more than you. Like, I think that they definitely did try. I mean, listen, Colt Cabana's typical ROH match is not much different from this, Trevor. Like, it's so.
I think he was taking a step back, even by comedy Colt standards.
I kind of don't agree with that. Like, it wasn't a great match, but it was what he does. It's not what he normally would do in the main event. I will give you this. It's something he would normally do in an opener. So if you want to say it was worked like a Colt Cabana opener, sure, fine. But I think Pierce was trying hard. I think Colt, it's funny how these farewell matches always end up being kind of slighter than others because wrestlers don't want to get hurt. I think Samoa Joe's was probably one of the better ones, right? And with Homicide, even that wasn't like 10 out of 10 Joe, but it was better than a lot of the ones we've seen. But I think for Cabana, it bothered me. It never bothers me. Let me change that. But it made me take less notice because it's Cabana. Like, this is a match that he works a lot, and he's all about the shtick more than he is about the wrestling, especially in the recent months. And, I think, they had some fun stuff. I mean, the fighting in the streamers was fun because there were so many streamers, him wrapping the streamers around Pierce and just, pushing him down. There was, the test of strength thing where he got Pierce to, put his hands up and down, like they were dancing, and then do YMCA, right? Then Pierce was going is this funny while he was doing it? I enjoyed that. There's a spot where Pierce gets a leg lock on him and he goes, Pierce, wait a second. And Pierce is like, what? So Colt calmly moves his hand and removes him and goes, thank you. There's the whole thing where Cabana tricks Hagedorn, his Hagedorn tries to get involved. So he does almost like an Eddie Guerrero type thing where he hits the ring post or the apron with a chair and pretends he was hitting the head with it, which gets Sinclair to toss out or eject Hagedorn. And Hagedorn throws a big temper tantrum. I thought that was fun. So it was that kind of stuff. Nothing serious. Yeah. I will say this. There was a spot where Cabana went for the flying asshole in the corner, but Pierce caught him and German suplexed him. And I thought that's a fucking awesome reversal. They could have done that in a much more serious match and had it get over really well. It's kind of a waste of that kind of reversal, but I guess also in some ways a last chance to do it. So I don't totally blame it. Pierce even did a top rope leg drop, which Prazak called the Illinois Jam. But yeah, other than that, it was basically everything you said. A silly heel face match with no ambition to be much more. I thought it was entertaining. I didn't expect anything more from it. I wouldn't have demanded anything more from it, especially with Colt. So it was fine. But yes, it was all about just the victory lap.
And the only other note I have for the match itself is Gabe gets on commentary at one point, like he often does in situations like this, just for a minute to put over Cabana. He calls him one of his favorite guys to work with throughout Ring of Honor's history. And judging by the farewell he gives him on the show, I would say that's probably true. It seems like he really liked working with him. And after the match, Colt gets a big ovation before the fans chant speech. Colt grabs the mic and tells Adam Pearce that as big a jerk as he is, he looked up to him as an idol when he first started wrestling, to which a few fans in the crowd at that moment give a perplexed, not Steve Austin, what? Like they were like gently like, what? But it's true. And Colt explains, Pierce showed him how to run the roads and bust your butt in professional wrestling. Colt says Adam is the reason why he is who he is today. Colt asks to leave on a good note with a handshake. Pierce snatches the mic away from Colt and says he's known Colt for nearly 10 years. His mom and dad brought him into their home. Colt's mom cooked him scrambled eggs. They went to rival high schools, and after 10 years of watching Colt grow into one of the greatest wrestlers on planet Earth, there's a million things that go through his mind. But in front of everyone in their hometown, only one thing goes through his mind that resonates, at which point Pierce spits right in Colt's face and walks backstage to booze. And then at that point, the rest of the ROH roster, as well as Colt's parents, and they're all led by Homicide, make their way to the ring to celebrate. Colt says a lot has been going on the last month, and the first thing he wanted to do, besides wipe the spit off his face, is thank Kerry Silken, who he describes as the owner and savior of Ring of Honor. Colt says he knows that Kerry doesn't like the recognition, but says Kerry saved the promotion that he loves. Colt says that ever since he saw Paul London kiss the ROH logo in his farewell to the promotion, he's asked himself what he would say in the same situation, and he's got nothing. Colt says this is not a farewell, it's a celebration. It's more than pro wrestling, it's life. Colt was just some chubby little kid with braces from the suburbs of Chicago with a dream to be a pro wrestler. It's all he wanted to do. The odds were against him. He wasn't 6'8". His dad wasn't a professional wrestler. He's a salesman, and a good one at that. Colt's dad then gets a round of applause for being a good salesman. Colt says his parents told him he could do whatever he wanted to do in his life, and if you take away one thing, and it's the cheesiest thing, Colt's dream was to be a star in the sport of professional wrestling, and he's not saying that's what he's going to do. That's what he's already done here in Ring of Honor. 4.5 years of his life, some of the best years in the greatest promotion. Colt says he isn't going to give you the speech about Ring of Honor because the fans here bought the ticket. They know how great the wrestlers are. They know what a genius Gabe Sapolsky is. They know how hard these guys work to put the ring up. This is a celebration of Ring of Honor. Colt says he's done a lot here, but there's one thing he didn't get to do, which is represent ROH as its world champion. Colt says he's going to go off and do his thing, but asks Gabe, who did not come out to the ring, because Gabe usually doesn't come out to the ring for these things, to get that pencil ready, because one day he's going to try and hold the most coveted belt in the world of professional wrestling, the ROH World title. Colt says the fans love professional wrestling just like he loves professional wrestling, and they love Ring of Honor just like he loves Ring of Honor. And Chicago, he loves you. Peace. I'm out of here.
Is there any reason for Tony Khan not to just get Colt Cabana to win the ROH title at this point? Like, why not?
Yeah. It would certainly piss off somebody probably, but he goes, peace, I love you, I'm out of here. Colt shakes hands and hugs a bunch of the roster as Billy Joel's song The Entertainer plays over the PA. We get a big thank you Colt chant as the entire roster takes a photo in the ring, which ends up being the cover of the DVD release. Colt slaps hands with the whole front row, including Dr. Keith Lipinski, and he hugs one teary-eyed female fan. In fact, I noted he hugged like 3 fans here, and all the fans he hugged were female. Real Richard Dawson Family Feud energy from Colt here. and that ends the show. So before we get into Colt stuff, I thought that was, it was not maybe Samoa Joe speech level, but I thought it was genuine. I thought he worked really hard to put over the coming. I appreciate the tactic too, which is like, I'm not going to give you the speech where I tell you how great Ring of Honor is because you already know how great it is, but he was kind of expressing it more from like, I had the best time of my life here, and I still want to come back and win the title, one day.
I like the part where he said, like, I wanted to be a star in wrestling, and that's not what I'm going to do. That's what I've done here in Ring of Honor. I thought that was a really nice line.
Yeah, I thought that was maybe the best line of the whole thing too. Like, just the idea of, I'm not putting this over as a stepping stone. I'm putting this over as like, this isn't what I needed to do to get to my dream. This was part of my dream. I've already achieved it. And I thought that's a really kind of nice sentiment that really puts over the entire promotion. And I even like the Adam Pearce stuff at the very start, right? Because I feel like there's 2 ways to go with these kind of farewells with the heel, where you can either have the heel be like, I'm going to kind of break character and to really put over in the moment, say, I love you actually, and you're great. Or I'm going to try and get some heel heat by just saying, fuck you. I'm going to be the one guy that doesn't break character. And they kind of had their cake and eat it too there, right? Like they had Pearce kind of put over Colt as like a great wrestler and then spit in his face. So they got both. Which
exactly. I think they played it perfectly.
Yeah. So, do you have any other thoughts about the speech? I mean, it was a nice speech.
About the speech itself, no, don't really have any.
Okay,
thoughts,
yeah. So let's get to let's get to the big thing. Okay, Colt's career. Matt, what'd you think about Colt's career? Obviously, like I said, the theme of this show, in some ways, is bittersweet because if Homicide didn't quite make it to the level of his contemporaries, and Allison Danger doesn't get appreciated maybe for some of the work she has done, Colt, kind of belongs in that, I would say, that club, right?
Yeah, I think Colt's a guy that definitely did not become as big of a star after leaving as I thought he would. I guess maybe it's for the same reason that he said when you reviewed at the beginning, which is that, the WWE top brass didn't really know him and they didn't sign him, so he wasn't their guy. And it was
just to interrupt you. I just want to give one quick, because I think I have a point that goes really well with your point. Unless stop me if this is something you were about to bring up. But like in those same interviews, something I didn't put in was he was like saying that he wasn't aiming for the stars. Like he was saying his goal is he wanted to basically be like Santino, like the mid-card comedy guy. And he tells this famous story where he's talking, I think, with like Dave Lagana, one of the WWE writers, and they're like, "You've got to pitch stuff for yourself, pitch stuff." He's like, "Pitch something for me." And Colt said, "I pitched them. I thought it'd be funny if I was the GM of Sunday Night Heat or whatever, because at that point it was an online only show. I thought the idea that I'm a GM of that show that low, it's a really funny idea." And Lagana was like, "Well, you got to aim higher than that." And Colt was like, he said, "Okay, I do a storyline where I main event WrestleMania. I beat John Cena for the world title. Then I beat Undertaker for the world title." And Lagana's like, "Okay, I get what you're saying." But I think that's one of the other things, like going to your point about thinking that Colt would do better and stuff, is like Colt wasn't aiming necessarily for the stars. I'm sure he would like that. He was aiming for like the role I think you and I thought he'd be a fit for, right? Which is probably like mid-card, IC title level, beloved comedy figure, right?
But maybe it's the sort of thing where to meet that level, you have to aim higher so they can slot you lower. Do you know what I mean? Like, yeah. If you aim too low, they will put you lower than that if they don't already see you as their guy.
That's a great point, actually.
Whereas if you, like, it's almost like, it's like a negotiating tactic, right? You ask for more than you want.
So it makes they love ambition there, even if they don't have the same ambition for you, they want you to pretend you have. Like they probably want every guy to say, "I'm going to main event WrestleMania." And even if they don't think you're ever going to be a main event WrestleMania main eventer, if you say, "Well, I'll probably be a good mid-carder," they're like, "Well, this guy's a loser."
Right, like if he wanted to get to like Zack Ryder level, he had to really like try to have the groundswell of like Zack Ryder style support, which was, people really wanted Zack Ryder to be really, really pushed, and he obviously never was, but he got to a level that maybe Colt would have been happy with. You know what I mean? And I don't know if that would have really made a difference, honestly. Like. But, the reason I bring it up is because in ROH, it was like his run was, he's he's a sports entertainer, right? He does the comedy stuff. He'll do a serious match every once in a while, and he eventually brought, I think, a lot of like fun British style wrestling to the US, that series with McGuinness, that absolutely classic, legendary, European rounds match that everybody loves. But actually, I think for you, that would be like the anti-Motor City Machine Guns versus the Briscoes match, right?
It is the one match I love that, not even love, but I think is pretty darn good, and even Colt Cabana doesn't like it.
Well, for the record, you rated it higher than the Briscoes versus Motor City Machine Guns match.
I did.
So, but, like you had that series, obviously his dynamic with Punk was a big thing, where Punk was trying to be very serious all the time, and then Cabana would keep interrupting with playfulness and wackiness, and Punk would get mad and say, "Well, I've had enough of your tomfoolery and your shenanigans." It's kind of sad to talk about him and Punk together, obviously, but he throughout the run, they would try to give him a jump up. The different points, a level up, I guess you would say. He would get certain world title matches. He had a couple of matches with Danielson. And, of course, the big departure for him was the feud with Homicide, where he was trying to show his serious side. They ended up having some really good matches. The promos never really got there, I don't think. Maybe he had like one or two that were pretty good in terms of serious promos. Ended up having a really good brawl with Jimmy Jacobs, too, near the end of his run there. But... mostly it was comedy. Mostly he did these shorter, mid-card, beginning-of-card comedy matches. That, to me, is what I'll remember Colt Cabana for in ROH. He was still always very entertaining. The crowd always loved him. He was very charismatic. I think he was never a great promo, per se, in ROH, but his charisma carried him. I don't know that him not being there'll be this big feeling of loss, in terms of I don't know if these shows needed Colt Cabana style matches. I think they were sometimes welcome. I think sometimes they were all right, we've seen this shit already. But he's tremendously talented. Really good at whatever he tried. I really did think that he would do better in WWE. And I'm still not completely sure why he didn't. I think that he had a very good run. I think he was an important part, obviously not the most important, but of the Second City Saints act. I think he became just this kind of beloved figure, just by being so likable. Once he turned face, with the Second City Saints in 2004, there was never really a chance that he could go back heel. Just his the crowd wouldn't have bought it. You know what I mean? It just wouldn't have worked. So I do think he probably reached the ceiling there. I don't think that he was ever going to be world champion during that era. But I'm not joking when I say why not Tony Khan? Bring Cole back in, give him a world title win. Give these wrestlers their moments. Why not? That's how I feel about it. Why not?
I've said this before, but when I think of Colt's ROH career, I see him as the ultimate utility player, probably in the promotion's history. There are a lot of wrestlers that can only really work if you push them in very specific ways, right? There are wrestlers that only work if they're protected top-level stars, and there are wrestlers that could never work in main events. Colt is a guy who could work anywhere on the card. He'd fit perfect as the opener. He's always a fan favorite that gets fans engaged. He'd work anywhere on the undercard. He works fine. And then, while he isn't someone I would quite work as a long-term main eventer in a promotion like ROH, he absolutely was a guy with the right match, with the right opponent, with the right build. The fans would completely accept it, and he could have some great performances. I think that Austin Aries cage match in 2005 is one of the best matches of Aries' entitled world, 6-month world title reign in Ring of Honor. And Aries wrestled a who's who of great names, and they had a really good match compared to a lot of those other guys. And then, there are also, again, versatility. There are wrestlers that are only work as comedy fodder, and there are wrestlers that where if they did comedy once, it would kill their mystique. And Colt was obviously a great comedy wrestler, but he could work a straight wrestling match that was usually good. And again, with the right opponent, could be very good or great. He could fit in with the modern U.S. indie style that he came up with, but he also eventually added some of that world of sport stuff. And, going back to if the ROH of the first 5 years was a sports team, Colt wasn't one of the star players on the team, but he was the guy that the coach loved because he could play so many different positions in so many situations and was just always dependable. He gave you such flexibility with how you ran things. And when I think of his legacy, though, it's interesting because I think of the three big ROH names leaving on this show, not counting Danger, who has her own big influence with the women's stuff, Daniels, Homicide, and Colt. I think Daniels and Homicide are easy, no-doubter yeses for me on if they should be in the ROH Hall of Fame, any ROH Hall of Fame. But with Colt, the answer on that is something I'm a little on the fence on because he kind of feels like he's that one tier lower to me, like he's in the ROH's Hall of Very Good. He never got that run as champ. He maybe, while being consistently good, didn't have quite enough of those make you buy the DVD level matches that ROH was built on. But then if we go ask that second question, which is, do Daniels, Homicide, and Colt belong in a wider ranging general all of U.S. Independent Wrestling Hall of Fame? Not only do I say yes to all three of them, including Colt, I think there's a very good argument that Colt has the strongest case of those three guys for that kind of Hall of Fame because he has an amazing case when it comes to influence. He was one of the earliest guys of his generation in this scene to see the potential in really hustling, as in making and selling your own merch. I think I was listening to an honorable mention. They mentioned that Colt, I think along with Kevin Owens or Kevin Steen back then, was one of the only guys that ROH had to buy their merch from them because they were making their own merch. They weren't oh, you make it and then you sell it and give us a cut. It's no, I'm making my own merch. You want to sell it? you can buy some of these shirts from me, maybe. And so I actually found a quote from Colt years ago on the Into the Danger Zone podcast where he said, quote, "When I'm on independent shows and I get there and there's no table space for me, I'll just be like, man, this is so wild. Not that I was the inventor, but a group of my friends, like me and M-Dog and Chris Hero, would be like, have table space for us. We're selling merch. Nobody else is doing anything." He said, now there's tables with like 75 wrestlers lined up across. I had a part in a change in the culture of wrestling, and for better or for worse, whatever, I think for the better. And then on top of that, Colt does the Art of Wrestling podcast, which did Colt invent wrestling podcasts or even or podcasts in general? No. Like, was it wholly original? No, it was obviously Colt going, I like Mark Maron's WTF. What if I did that for wrestling? But it was a good show that had an audience and was another example of a wrestler like thinking outside the box and building a brand of something outside of wrestling to help keep his fan base engaged with him and build a fan base as an independent wrestler.
That's the most influential thing he did, was that starting that podcast, years after leaving ROH, I would say. And obviously influential for several reasons, including obviously that CM Punk episode that was so famous. Yeah. But even without that, I would have said the same thing.
And then you also even have one other thing, which is the fact that he was the guy that really got 1 hour tees to see the potential in wrestling and start Pro Wrestling Tees and say whatever you want about the quality of merch from Pro Wrestling Tees. And I've seen a lot of people say a lot of things about it. That did change things for wrestlers on the indies, that having the ability to print their merch on demand, just have someone come up with a good image and they can upload it and print out the shirt on demand, and they don't have to maybe take the financial leap of faith of I'm going to have to order 200 of these shirts and hope that I can sell them. If you read the Young Bucks autobiography, which I looked up to for the show, they really put over Colt as a guy that they looked to for advice when they started making their own merch. They say when they even started their first website, Dana Massey, one of their, Matt's wife, I believe, patterned their first website after Colt's website. Colt even gave them advice, they say, when they were starting to do Being the Elite, like saying, like, you got to be consistent about it and do it regularly. Basically, like, the Bucks took the example Colt laid out of how to, like, build your own brand and outside revenue streams and find ways to talk to your fans as an indie wrestler. And they did it bigger to even more success, to the point where that brand basically became something so valuable that Tony Khan, you could basically say, bought it to start AEW. And like, there's definitely in some ways a lineage, I don't think it's crazy to say, of Colt to the Bucks to AEW, of a certain kind of entrepreneurship and building a brand on the indies that's so valuable that like a billionaire wrestling fan could say, we could start something with this. We could start something national with a brand that is built by independent wrestlers on the indies. All
right. You convinced me. That's the most influential thing he did.
Yeah. I mean, that's a huge thing. And finally, I just want to end with, I found a tweet thread from way back in 2019 where R.D. Evans, former wrestler and, creative person at different wrestling promotions, wrote, quote, "I don't think future generations of wrestlers will be able to grasp how much the landscape they will inherit has been shaped by Colt Cabana. But I know those of us who experienced his transformative influence in real time are forever grateful." And then Mike Quackenbush replied to that saying, quote, "I could not agree with this more. There are those with 3 times his level of fame that don't wield an iota of his influence." And then Dave Meltzer replied to that with, quote, "If you take him," Kim being Colt, "out of the picture, the entire industry is completely different. Some people will understand that, others may not, but it's clearly the case." So again, like, arguably one of the more, you could argue in certain respects, one of the more influential guys.
Yeah, like a lot of people obviously do argue that.
Yeah.
And he's not that old. Like, maybe he'll still get a chance to, make a mark more on the, on like a televised product. You never know. It's not too late, I would say.
And that is true. I do feel like, I think Colt's expressed this desire too. I do think he's one of those guys. He'll probably be wrestling when he's 70, right? Like on some indie somewhere doing it. Cause it's a style he can do. And I think he just likes doing it. And I think, again, he's expressed that, I think. A couple last things I want to end on real quick for this. I just want to say, first off, I completely agree with you with like, Colt was the guy I was sure was going to make it in WWE. I was shocked that not just did he not make it, but he just like completely got almost no chance, because I was thinking, the old adage, and we're recording this on the day that Ron Killings, R-Truth, announced that he is being released by WWE when his contract comes to an end. And, the old adage they said about him, and they say, well, a lot of people with Vince McMahon was, if you want like a if you want a long career in the WWE, make Vince McMahon laugh. You know, it might doom you to like a comedy mid-card push, but like he often like keeps those people that he really gets a kick out of longer than you might think he would with other guys of comparable push. And I felt like Colt's a guy who he's a bit more of a jock. He's not going to have like a Bryan Danielson style moment where he tells Vince that he doesn't eat steak and Vince has a panic attack about it. You know, he's a legitimately funny guy who aspires to be funny. You know, he's well liked and he's not a small wrestler, but then I didn't realize one, and I think Colt said this in one of those interviews I quoted, he's not big compared to like any of the guys in developmental at that time. Like he's not Drew McIntyre in any respect in terms of size. And I think you made a great point just now about maybe the fact that he wasn't as ambitious to like reach for the stars, that he was more maybe open about, I'm more of a realist and I am aiming for the middle. Like you said, maybe that hurt him. And also maybe his comedy wasn't the kind of comedy that would appeal to a guy like Vince McMahon because
not enough poop.
Exactly, because
not mean enough even.
Colt has some immature, goofy, base level comedy, and I don't say that as a negative, but like, you know, he's a guy who's like a fan of Chris Gethard and like alt indie comedy, and like that is not Vince McMahon's sense of humor. I couldn't imagine.
Yeah,
like,
I don't know if the humor that Colt did in ROH was like alt indie comedy.
Yeah.
I wasn't trying to make like a crude like Janelle Grant reference with like the poop thing. Like, no. You know, you saw like what Vince McMahon finds funny. It's mean spirited, like, and it's gross. And like it's just dumb humor. That's not really what Colt was doing. Colt was wholesome in his humor 90% of the time.
And I guess the last thing I'll say is the thing that's kind of sad is I think that influence we talked about, it's another thing kind of like the Homicide thing, which is the people that followed Colt in the scene. We know the influence he has. To some degree, maybe we even underestimate it, but he's going, I think, unfortunately, to like the general public, to a lot of people, he's going to be remembered as this weird footnote in wrestling history who they'll just think of as, oh, he was a friend of of CM Punk and at the center of like one of the crazier wrestling stories of the last 20 years. And, you know, he is more than CM Punk's former friend. You know, he clearly has more influence than that. And I think it's going to be another one of those things where people like us will remember. Will future generations be able to have the motive to dig in and find that out for themselves? I don't know, which is kind of bittersweet. But, you know, that's Matt. You know what? Bittersweet still means you got some sweet. I just got the bitterness. So you know what? Things could be worse. With all that said, on a Herculean episode, Matt, with so many options, who wins the Matt F. Trophy this episode?
Is it mean if I don't give it to Colt Cabana?
I don't think it's mean. I think we just gave him some propers.
Yeah.
You know.
All right. It's definitely then Shingo Takagi. Like, you know, I just thought his performance in that match was awesome. Got the crowd rocking and rolling. That match was one of my favorite matches of 2007 ROH so far, honestly. And I think that he was the one that really drove the action and made it different than other Morishima matches. You know, I'm glad that I got a chance to give him that trophy because, you know, the rest of his ROH run, like we said, was good, but, you know, he didn't show that side of himself. And I'm glad he got to before we ended up moving on from his era. So Shingo wins the Matt F. Trophy.
As always, a great choice. And I wish there was a real trophy because I'm just now laughing to myself, imagining Shingo on the plane back to Japan in his lap as he sits in the chair in the plane holding a little Matt F. trophy that he was given right as he was like leaving.
Oh, you assume it's little, do you?
What is this, like Stanley Cup size? I thought it'd be like small novelty trophy you bought for like $64 from a trophy store. How big is
that's the real one I have. But this imaginary Matt F. trophy we have for the show is like the one that Bad News Brown won at WrestleMania 4 that Bret Hart destroyed. It's tall. It's almost as tall as you are, Trevor.
It's taller than Pele Primo. But so that brings us to plugs. ThROH The Years at gmail.com. THROH for through. On Twitter at Trevor Dame, at Mayor MGF, also on Blue Sky under similar names. Just search for that stuff. And next time on the show, we are just covered a huge show. We got two more big shows coming up because our next show is Reborn Again, which is ROH's first show after they announced pay-per-view, where TNA pulls the talent yet again. And in a dark time for Ring of Honor, Matt, what happens when you lose so many regulars? Joe's gone, Colt's gone, all the TNA guys are gone. Bryan Danielson, our sweet boy, is back, Matt. He comes back. So, and then the show after that, we're covering the first pay-per-view. So tons of stuff coming up soon on Through the Years. Should be a lot of fun. This is another hot summer. Sometimes literally, unfortunately, when we're doing a podcast. But until next time, have a good time. Have a great time. Have great memories.